This woman had transmigrated into a trashy novel co-written by 10 different authors. The book featured 10 devastatingly handsome male leads, each different from the last, and one heroine who had won every one of their hearts, except she hadn't landed in the heroine's body. She'd been dropped into some nameless background extra with zero presence in the plot. Still, that wasn't enough to break her spirit, because she knew everything there was to know about this novel, and she'd already started dreaming up a life of happiness beyond anything she could have imagined in her past life, using every scrap of insider knowledge she had. Sadly, dreams were one thing, and reality was another. As a commoner, she had almost no way to rise in this world. One day, while she was working at a restaurant, her friend Puli showed up with a group of strangers in tow. The man in front of her looked at her with cold eyes and asked whether she was Daisy Hetty. Before Daisy could even think of what to say, Puli, useless as ever, burst into tears and wailed, "Daisy, I'm so sorry," confirming her identity in an instant. It turned out these people belonged to the household of Duke Hunston, and they were there to drag Daisy off for judgment. They hauled her away by force and threw her roughly into a carriage. Meanwhile, Puli, without a shred of guilt, called after her to ask whether the Duke's estate happened to be hiring. Daisy silently swore that the next time she saw that walking disaster, she was going to end her. In the novel, Duke Hunston possessed a flawless face and held the power of life and death over everyone around him, though he'd never actually appeared on the page. This Duke was, in fact, the heroine's father. Daisy was brought before him, taking in a room as opulent as a palace. He looked down at her and asked for her basic information. Once she answered honestly, he suddenly asked, "Did you work at Cherno's, the restaurant near the docks? Are you still working there now?" The domineering Duke answered his own question coldly. "No, not anymore. You've just been fired." Daisy looked up at him in shock at the news, and it was only then that she truly registered how handsome he was. Glistening tears welled unconsciously at the corners of her mouth, and she wiped them away with her sleeve without even meaning to, unwilling to so much as blink. The Duke pulled out a necklace and threw it to the ground. "Do you recognize this? Your idiot friend sold it to a jeweler. The shop owner suspected it was stolen and reported him. You understand exactly how serious a charge that is. I won't tolerate a single rat scurrying through my territory, and that boy told us the person who gave it to him was you." He rose to his feet, crushed the necklace under his heel, and demanded, "Where did this necklace come from?" Trembling under the Duke's gaze, Daisy recalled how it had all happened. Puli was the first friend she'd made after transmigrating into this world. The day before she met Duke Hunston, Puli had come to her looking utterly pitiful. When Daisy asked what was wrong, Puli lunged at her for a hug. Daisy fended her off with a foot. "Keep your distance, just spit it out," Puli whimpered. "They're about to auction off my house, and I've got no money and nowhere to move. My mom's sick again, and I need money for her treatment, fast." Daisy pressed a hand to her forehead. "I don't know where you expect me to get money from. What good does telling me do?" But Puli kept droning on, laying it on thicker and thicker until she was outright sobbing. Worn down, Daisy finally sighed, and handed her a small box. The very box that held the necklace the Duke had just thrown to the ground. Puli, delighted, tried to hug her, and Daisy shoved her off in disgust. She told Puli firmly, "This is the only time I'm helping you. If someone like us, poor as we are, walks around with something like this, people will assume it's stolen. So even if you have to take a loss, don't sell it at a jeweler's." Puli agreed readily enough, and then went straight to the jeweler anyway. The Duke told Daisy that according to Puli, she'd wanted money to buy her boyfriend a carriage and needed it urgently. That answer alone was enough to make Daisy furious. The Duke said flatly that this detail didn't matter. What mattered was where the necklace had actually come from. "I bought it with my own savings at an auction. It wasn't obtained through any shady means." The Duke, puzzled by the word auction, had the records checked. He discovered that the necklace's original owner had died not long ago, and that the auction for the deceased's belongings had only been known to a handful of close friends and relatives. For someone with no connection whatsoever, like Daisy, to happen upon it and buy it strained belief. Daisy thought privately that there was nothing in this book she didn't know, but she couldn't very well say that out loud. Growing impatient, the Duke moved to have her sent off for trial. Daisy decided to go all in and tell him everything she knew. The Duke, pleased by her resolve, said, "Fine." But what came out of her mouth next left him stunned into silence. Having resolved to do or die, Daisy revealed secrets so deeply buried that even the Duke himself had forgotten them, talking all the way until the sun went down. By then, the Duke was finally convinced. Just as Daisy let out a breath of relief, the Duke suddenly asked what the novel was called. Cold sweat breaking out, Daisy stammered, the reason the Duke's daughter rolls around wholeheartedly in a pumpkin patch. The Duke looked baffled. My daughter has no reason to go anywhere near a farm. Daisy thought miserably that if the title weren't outrageous, how else was it supposed to hook readers? Even though she'd come up with it herself, she still felt mortified admitting it now. That's right, I wrote this book. I can't believe I've transmigrated into my own novel. The novel had been written jointly by Daisy and 9 other women. It contained each of their private fantasies with 10 male leads, each carrying the shameless indulgences buried in their authors' hearts. Every one of them had poured their own secret ideal man onto the page without holding back. Daisy explained the whole novel to the Duke. Just as she was starting to feel sentimental about her own unfortunate death in her past life, the Duke suddenly asked whether his daughter was the heroine. Daisy answered carefully that yes, she was. The Duke swelled with pride. Of course my daughter is the heroine, isn't that only natural? Then, changing tack, he asked what a decadent novel was. Daisy thought of the outlandish plotlines involving the Duke's daughter, and looking at his expectant face, decided the truth was not an option. She fumbled out an explanation. Decadent just means very tired, very worn down. The Duke's expression turned grave at once. So it's not exactly a happy story then? Daisy hastily apologized, but the Duke had moved on to something else. He wanted to know who the male leads were. Daisy stared blankly. You mean? The Duke pressed, voice icy, demanding the names of the male leads. Daisy stumbled through her answer. There were 10 of them. The Duke shot to his feet. Unbelievable. Getting close to my daughter is bad enough. Unbelievable. And now you're telling me she's meant to be some sacrificial lamb in a decadent story? Unbelievable. With cold fury, the Duke decided he was going to eliminate all 10 male leads. Watching him seethe, Daisy chose her words carefully. All of this is a long way off. Why not make use of me instead? Let me protect the heroine. I'm the author. I can change the future. The Duke turned to look at her and let out a short scoff. You? Protect Fialotta? I can write in content that doesn't exist in the original story, so your daughter never has to meet any of them. The Duke asked what would happen if she failed. Daisy confidently declared she was willing to pay with her own life, though the Duke made it clear he had no interest in her life at all. Just then, a servant came in to remind him that they were running late. The Duke murmured, almost to himself, I nearly forgot to see Fialotta over this trivial matter. Daisy was more than a little baffled by the way his mind worked. The Duke suddenly turned back to her. You said just now you could protect my daughter, is that right? Daisy answered eagerly that of course she could. The Duke decided to take her to meet Fialotta. Though he still had his doubts about her abilities, he was willing to give her one chance. The Duke extended his hand to Daisy. Just as she shyly reached out to take it, he yanked her up abruptly. Get up quickly. We're going to be late. But Daisy, her legs numb from kneeling so long, stumbled and fell. The Duke, wondering whether it was some rule that the original author couldn't meet the protagonist, rushed off in a panic to check on his daughter. Daisy followed the Duke to Fialotta's room. Before they went in, he told her, I'll introduce you as a candidate for her new nanny. Whether or not we actually hire you depends on my daughter's wishes. With that, he walked in beaming and scooped his daughter into an affectionate hug. It was then that Daisy finally got a good look at the heroine, an utterly adorable little girl, nothing at all like the version she'd pictured. Daisy stared at Fia's poofy hair, so much like a doll's, and reached out to touch it before catching herself, mindful of her job on the line. She tried greeting Fia, only for the girl to shyly bury her face in her father's chest. The Duke shot Daisy a look that seemed to say, You trying to get close to my daughter? What he didn't know was just how carefully Daisy had crafted Fia's character. She liked sweet things, the color green, and frogs. Daisy pulled out a little green frog-shaped candy, and with that, won herself an invitation to a tea party with Fia. At the tea party, Daisy fed Fia every candy she loved, only for the Duke to try wrapping things up early with the excuse that it was time to eat. Daisy then produced a little pumpkin candy for Fia. In the setting Daisy herself had written, a pumpkin patch was Fialotta's place of comfort. Delighted with the treat, Fia hugged Daisy and asked whether she liked pumpkins too. Daisy dramatically declared that without pumpkin, she couldn't even eat a proper meal. At that, Fia suddenly bolted back into her father's arms. Just as the Duke started to think his daughter didn't like Daisy after all, Fia spoke up. "I think Nanny Daisy is really nice." Then she ran off, blushing. The Duke stood there, dumbstruck, while Daisy was already flushed with excitement. In the end, the Duke had no choice but to let her take the job. Daisy was thrilled at the thought of being Fia's nanny, until the Duke clarified, "You only need to pretend to be her nanny. Your actual job is to keep my daughter from ever meeting the male leads." Daisy figured that in that case it was time to discuss pay. The Duke gave her a dismissive glance, walked back to his desk, and informed her she'd be living and eating at the estate from now on, and that she'd receive 10 times her salary for every male lead she managed to eliminate as a threat. When Daisy saw the actual number, her jaw dropped. She signed without a moment's hesitation, and the Duke tucked the contract away, satisfied. He then handed her a notebook and told her to write down everything she knew about the 10 male leads. Looking over the list, he noted that the 2 greatest threats came from the Imperial family and the Mage Tower. Since the male leads' names were so convoluted, Daisy racked her brain and could only recall 5, explaining that she was sure the rest would come back to her once she actually saw them. The Duke said tomorrow's gathering should include every noble he could summon. Daisy asked, a little dazed, whether the gathering had been planned in advance. The Duke answered grandly, "Can't you see I'm writing the invitations right now?" That very night, he had them all sent out. The next day, Daisy fantasized about becoming an imperial socialite, living in luxury and attending noble balls, and grinned foolishly to herself. Instead, the Duke had her dress as a servant. Since only servants could move freely through every corner of the ball, the better to hunt down the male leads. But with a full 150 guests in attendance, Daisy was run ragged by the noble ladies barking orders at her, while the Duke lounged on a bench, thoroughly enjoying the show. Just as her patience was about to snap and she was ready to walk off the job, she suddenly remembered one of the male leads, a brilliant, unhinged genius with red eyes who, after meeting Fiallotta, would fall madly in love with her and abandon everything he'd ever known. Except right now, he was still unborn, tucked away inside a pregnant woman's belly. While Daisy was wondering what to do, a burly man shoved into a pregnant woman, not only failing to apologize, but complaining that she was walking too slowly. It turned out he was a marquis of noble standing, hoping to show off his daughter at the ball, to win the Duke's favor and marry her off to him. Just as Daisy was curious about who Fia's birth mother might be, she noticed the pregnant woman was in visible pain and hurried to bring her a chair. Once the woman was seated, Daisy asked, "Countess Raphael, are you all right?" The Countess looked at her in surprise. "You know me?" Daisy made up an excuse, claiming the Duke had personally instructed her to look after the pregnant Countess. Touched, the Countess said she wanted to go find the Duke to thank him. Just as Daisy was heading off to report her findings on the male leads to the Duke, a lecherous old man harassed her, groping at her. Daisy wasn't about to tolerate that. She smacked him over the head with a plate. Watching him clutch his head in pain, it was only then that she remembered exactly where she was and realized she'd caused quite a scene. The old man looked up furiously and rose to make trouble for her, when the Duke walked over and took the plate from her hands. The man pointed to the lump on his head and demanded the Duke punish this ill-mannered woman. Instead, the Duke smiled darkly, produced a massive millstone, and handed it to Daisy. "If you're going to hit someone, you should use this." Daisy blinked, half wondering if he wanted her to crack the man's skull open. The old man, incredulous, asked whether the Duke was really going to punish him over some lowly servant. The Duke seized the man by the collar with terrifying force. "I don't allow anyone to be so insolent to a person under my protection." Daisy froze completely at those words. The Duke had the man forcibly dragged away, and Daisy watched his imposing back, cheeks flushing red. The young lady who had been watching the whole spectacle turned out to be the daughter of a marquise. Her father had brought her along hoping to introduce her to the Duke. She'd fallen for him at first sight, and was about to step forward to introduce herself. But the Duke didn't even glance her way. He simply turned and walked off. Both she and her father sensed something was off. It turned out the Duke had witnessed the whole confrontation between Daisy and the lecher. After the Duke chased the man off, Daisy wanted to tell him about finding one of the male leads, but he told her to find him in his study after the party and then left. Daisy suddenly realized she hadn't seen Fia at the ball at all. She went to knock on Fia's door, and when no one answered, she let herself in. She found Fia lying face down on her bed, looking utterly forlorn. The sight struck Daisy like a bolt of lightning. "My lady, are you upset about something?" Fia said, aggrieved. "I'm the only one who can't go out. I really wanted to go up to the second floor today, but I can't with the party going on." Daisy came up with an idea and took Fia up to the second floor terrace instead. Fia looked up at the glass roof and said she wished she could throw her own party there. Daisy played along and asked how warm Fia wanted her milk. Fia said just a little bit warm was fine. Daisy tried a gentle probe. "Is Duke Hunston, your father, the one who won't let you go out? Ask him nicely next time and I'm sure he'll say yes." Fia said, "No, it's not that Uncle won't let me go. I just don't want to go myself. They always touch my hair." Daisy agreed. "That's true. My lady's hair really does look like a chestnut. So cute." Fia said, "But my hair. Only I get to decide who touches it. Uncle can touch it. But you, Daisy, still can't." That was when it finally clicked for Daisy. Duke Hunston was actually Fia's uncle. There were apparently details in this story that even she, the author, hadn't known about. Daisy stayed with Fia as she got ready for bed, in her favorite pumpkin print pajamas, and after saying goodnight, Fia drifted off quickly. Exhausted from the long day, Daisy collapsed by the bedside too, and it was then that she thought back to what Fia had told her. Duke Hunston really was Fia's uncle, and Fia had said that if she stopped calling him Papa, her uncle would be very sad. Since Fia looked so upset about it, Daisy hadn't pushed for more. Drowsiness crept over her, and though she meant to go find the Duke in his study, in the end she couldn't fight it off and fell asleep right there by the bed. After the party ended, the Duke had been waiting for Daisy, but she never showed. When he went to check on Fia, he found Daisy asleep by the bedside and gently draped a blanket over her. The next day, Daisy told the Duke what she'd learned about the male lead. Learning that this particular one hadn't even been born yet gave the Duke a headache. Just as Daisy was about to explain more, he cut her off and asked how this male lead had first met Fialata, the answer being that he'd been her tutor. The Duke couldn't quite believe it. The eldest son of an earl's family, working as a tutor? Daisy explained he needed money for tuition abroad, since the Raphael family's finances weren't in great shape. She added wistfully that he'd become utterly infatuated with Fialata the moment he met her, throwing aside every advantage of his upbringing without a second thought, which really just went to show that raising a child properly— She never got to finish the thought, catching the Duke's icy stare and hastily clarifying that she hadn't meant Fialata specifically. Daisy suggested that if the male lead never became a tutor in the first place, he'd never cross paths with Fialata at all. The Duke said coldly that this was a decision only he would make, then dismissed her. As Daisy reached the door, she suddenly remembered what Fia had told her about the Duke being her uncle and turned back to ask him about it. The Duke was startled that she already knew. He handed her a thick stack of documents proving that Fialata was, legally, his daughter, no matter what anyone said. He looked her straight in the eye and said that if this ever got out— Seeing the warmth in his expression, Daisy didn't even let him finish before promising to keep the secret safely. It didn't matter whether Fia was his by blood. The man who cherished her and thought of her before anything else was the Duke, plain and simple. Hearing that, the Duke flushed and murmured his agreement, looking almost bashful. Fia's style of dress was different from that of other noble young ladies, but after spending time together, Daisy realized it suited her perfectly, and Fia loved it too. Just then, the Duke walked over to his bookshelf, pressed some hidden mechanism, and the shelf slid aside to reveal a wardrobe, stuffed full of gorgeous little dresses. Sadly, he lamented that the closet was nearly out of room, even though Fia had never worn a single one, and had never once let anyone else choose her outfits. Daisy tried to explain that it was probably because Fia liked running around too much and the fussy dresses just weren't practical. The Duke wasn't even listening, murmuring to himself instead. Isn't it remarkable, though, sticking to practical clothes at such a young age shows real practicality? And she doesn't like long hair either, which might mean she's destined to become an artist. He'd even asked Daisy not to tell him in advance which field Fia would eventually shine in. He wanted to watch her grow into it with his own eyes, step by step. Daisy watched the Duke's mood lighten and wondered how on earth she was going to deal with the male lead problem. He kept rambling on about Fia's countless remarkable qualities until the sky brightened, only then letting Daisy go. Thinking Fia would be busy with lessons all day and wouldn't need her much, Daisy finally drifted off to sleep. She was jolted awake by a sudden commotion, thinking to herself that with the party over, there shouldn't be anything else going on. She went out and asked one of the servants what was happening. She was told that a count and countess were expected that evening, and the Duke wanted to receive them with the highest possible courtesy. Startled, Daisy asked if it was Count and Countess Raphael. The servant thought about it and said it seemed to be. Daisy thanked him and rushed toward the dining hall, never having imagined the Duke could move this fast. He must not trust her at all to be acting with such urgency. As she ran, she wondered why he'd invited the Count and Countess in the first place, and why he hadn't told her a single word about it. The steward said the Duke might be in his office, but Daisy searched the entire estate and couldn't find him anywhere. With no other option, she went back to her room and decided that if she couldn't find the Duke before dinner, she'd have to take matters into her own hands. She put on a maid's uniform, disguised herself as a servant, and took over the job of pushing the food cart from one of the serving staff. As she wheeled it toward the dining hall, she marveled at how exquisite the food looked. It was rare for the Duke to entertain guests with such elaborate dishes, and she wondered what he could possibly be planning. When Daisy reached the dining room and pushed the door open to greet everyone, she overheard the Count asking the Duke why he was making such an offer, which instantly piqued her curiosity. She set the food on the table while sneaking glances at their expressions. The Duke noticed her and frowned slightly but chose not to expose her. The Duke continued explaining to the Count that he'd read his research paper and thought he was an exceptionally talented scholar, one who shouldn't have to waste his life away unrecognized. That was why he wanted the Count and Countess to seriously consider his proposal. Daisy eavesdropped from the side, thoroughly confused and increasingly anxious. The Count then said that becoming a scholar had been his lifelong dream, but as the head of his household, he was no longer young. And with a child on the way, he'd never expected the Duke to actually write him a letter of recommendation to the Tyston Empire's academy. The Duke added that he had great expectations for the Count and wanted to send him off to study as soon as possible. He'd even take care of both the housing and transportation for the trip. Listening from the sidelines, Daisy was stunned. She hadn't expected the Duke to go to such lengths. While the Countess, unaware of the real motive, bowed deeply in gratitude. After the couple left, Daisy stopped the Duke and asked whether sending the Count abroad had something to do with the male lead. But that child hadn't even been born yet, so what would happen to the Raphael family in the meantime? The Duke said, unbothered, that some relative would surely inherit the title. Their son had wanted to study abroad eventually anyway. He was simply sending him a few decades early. What difference did it make? The next day, Daisy asked the Duke, astonished, "Did you empty out all of my belongings?" He replied casually that they should have arrived the day before. Hadn't she received them yet? Daisy panicked, realizing her escape route had just been cut off. She'd been keeping her old place as a fallback in case she ever got fired and needed to go back to waitressing. The Duke said, puzzled, "As I recall, you weren't exactly in a position to pay rent on time." Daisy admitted weakly that she'd been afraid of the day he might throw her out. He said dismissively, "If I were going to throw you out that easily, I wouldn't have announced in front of so many people that you're mine. And besides, don't you know a secret that big already?" He shot her a sidelong glance and smirked. "Do you really think I'd let you go so easily?" Daisy watched him walk away, blushing furiously, still turning over what exactly he'd meant by mine. Around then, Shadi told Daisy her luggage had apparently been received by butler Peter and would be delivered shortly. Daisy studied this character who'd never once appeared in the original novel and figured it made sense. Duke Hunston himself had never appeared either. Recalling Shadi's uncannily perceptive eyes, she reminded herself that even though this was technically her own novel, there was still far too much she didn't know, and she needed to be careful. Just then, butler Peter arrived carrying Daisy's trunk, dropped it on the ground with a thud, and snapped angrily, "Why should I be running around after some lowly girl?" He coldly accused her of being lazy despite her young age. Daisy was still puzzled over why he was so furious. Surely he could have just told her when the luggage arrived. And thinking it wiser not to make a scene, was about to apologize. When Fia came bounding over, eager to play with her, butler Peter greeted Fia warmly, but she looked terrified. Sure enough, he immediately turned cold and demanded to know if the running footsteps he'd heard earlier had been hers. Fia darted behind Daisy in fright, while the butler kept rattling on, criticizing everything about her. Her hairstyle, her clothes, her manners, warning that if she kept it up, she'd never marry well and would ruin the Hunston family's reputation. Listening to the butler's unhinged rant, Daisy completely lost it, furious that he'd dare speak to her lady that way. Thinking Daisy was just a new servant, he barely registered her presence. Aiden told Fia that if she didn't act more composed, she'd grow up to be an ignorant woman. Daisy, drawing on years of storytelling experience, tore into him verbally until he was fuming with humiliation. And he snapped that if this had been a young master instead of a young lady, none of the staff would have dared act so disrespectfully. Daisy shot back, "You old man, you can't say one decent thing to save your life." Enraged, he demanded to know who she thought she was, addressing him like that. "I'm the new nanny," Daisy said. "What of it?" He didn't believe her for a second, since he'd seen her working at the ball. That was when Fia spoke up meekly and confirmed that Daisy really was her nanny. Learning that Daisy was indeed Fia's nanny left butler Peter thoroughly rattled, though he still sneered that someone like her couldn't possibly be fit for the role. Daisy figured that even though this was technically just a temporary cover, she'd own it anyway. The butler blustered, "If I find out you're lying, I'll have you thrown out the very first chance I get." Daisy said calmly, "Go ahead and ask the Duke yourself." He fired back angrily, "You think I won't?" Remembering everything the butler had said to Fia, Daisy turned on him with real fury. "Even if I do get thrown out, I'll make sure your coffin's ready before I go. If you don't want to die here, then listen carefully. Never speak such worthless garbage to Lady Fiallotta ever again. Call her a brat one more time and see what happens. I'll break your legs before I put you in that coffin. And one more thing, I get out of this room." Butler Peter shook with rage and slunk off in defeat. Just as Daisy was fuming that the wretched old man hadn't even apologized on his way out, Fia asked timidly whether she was upset. Daisy immediately smiled and told her no, she wasn't upset at all. Fia said, "Grandpa Peter is always like that with me, and it's all because of me. I'm sorry." Daisy took her small hand and comforted her. "There's nothing to apologize for. Your father is the Duke. No one would dare treat you carelessly." But Fia's voice broke as she admitted that everyone said more or less the same things Grandpa Peter did. That the clothes she picked were ugly, that her short hair looked strange, and asked if it was really true if she asked her father. She wrapped her arms around Daisy and added, "I won't tell Papa what just happened. If I'm never allowed to see you again, that would really break my heart." Daisy thought about everyone who'd ever left, wondering if they'd all looked at Fia the same way that horrid old man had. The thought of everything Fia had endured made her nose sting with unshed tears. She scooped Fia up and whispered into her ear, "If anything like this ever happens again, don't tell Papa. Tell me instead. If you tell him, everyone will stop coming near you out of fear. But if you tell me, it'll be fine." Fia asked, "If I tell you, will you never leave?" Daisy held up her little finger and promised, "I'll always be here." Fia hooked her own little finger around Daisy's. Then she suddenly asked, "Do you want to pet my head?" Daisy asked, startled. "Your head?" Fia explained, "Because you're amazing and you're really good to me, and now we even have a secret together. We're friends now." Daisy, her heart melting, finally got to touch that adorable chestnut-round head of hair. As the days flew by, Daisy and Fia grew closer and closer, and Fia came to adore her deeply. Meanwhile, the Duke, tied up with investment matters, entrusted Daisy with the full responsibility of looking after Fia. Then, one day out of nowhere, Fia insisted on taking Daisy somewhere, and grabbed her hand, breaking into a run. Fia led Daisy down a long corridor that ended at a strange, gnarled old tree. Daisy studied it, its bare branches, its blackened trunk, and realized the roots must have rotted through. Fia looked up at the tree and said the gardener who worked here had told her the story. A long time ago, her mother had planted this tree, which was why it was still standing here. She picked a handful of pretty flowers and showed them to Daisy. Daisy said warmly, "This place must mean a lot to you, which is why you brought me here, right?" Fia smiled. "Of course you understand. I don't even need to explain." She tucked a flower behind Daisy's ear, and looking at her radiant, almost fairy-like face, Fia blushed and said her heart skipped a beat. Daisy asked, confused, why it would skip a beat, and Fia dashed off embarrassed. But right then Fia let out a scream. Daisy rushed over to find her crouched on the ground, trembling. A swarm of bees was charging straight at them. Daisy scooped Fia up and ran for the castle, the bees relentlessly chasing after them, and she held Fia tightly against her the entire way. Once they made it back inside, the Duke called for a doctor. Thankfully, the bees weren't venomous, and Fia had only been stung twice. Seeing that she wasn't seriously hurt, the Duke sent the doctor away. Daisy, wrapped in a cloak, her face a sickly shade of blue, was still blaming herself, thinking she should have held Fia tighter, that she never should have taken her somewhere so dangerous in the first place. Noticing Daisy's trembling body, the Duke frowned and told her to take off the cloak. She resisted, refusing to remove it, but he kept closing the distance until he had her backed against the wall, then struck a rather dramatic pose and tore the cloak off her roughly. He was shocked to see her shoulders covered in bee stings, and Daisy, swaying, fainted right into his arms. When Daisy woke again, it was already the dead of night, and the first thing she saw was the Duke still sitting in her room. He'd brought ointment and sat carefully on the edge of her bed, gently applying it to her wounds, and apologized. "It's because of my child that you ended up like this." Daisy thought, "No, it's my fault Fia got hurt in the first place," and drifted back into unconsciousness before she could say it aloud. Watching her sleep, the Duke recalled what the doctor had said, that it had been a real close call, and that the fact she hadn't passed out sooner was already remarkable. She must have been in so much pain. It must have taken tremendous willpower to keep running all the way back. The Duke reached out to stroke her head, then pulled his hand back, worried he might wake her. He simply tucked the blanket around her gently, and went to tell Shadi to gather all the gardeners. When Fia saw that her mother's tree was gone, she threw herself to the ground and sobbed uncontrollably. The Duke explained, "There was no other way. It was simply too dangerous. Weren't you in pain just yesterday?" Fia protested, struggling. "It didn't hurt at all. It wasn't dangerous." "What do you mean, not dangerous? Daisy was badly hurt yesterday protecting you." Fia turned sharply to look at Daisy, and threw herself into her arms, apologizing. Daisy hugged her fondly and reassured her. "I'm fine." The Duke tried to change the subject. "Let's go get breakfast." What no one expected was that Fia suddenly started calling the Duke Uncle. "Uncle is just the worst," she huffed, storming off. Hearing her call him Uncle, the Duke's heart skipped a beat in dread. Daisy followed Fia back to her room and found her burrowed under the blankets, ignoring even her favorite round cookies. Fia said sadly that the tree had meant so much to her. Daisy recalled just how deeply Fia had treasured it, and never imagined that overnight, the Duke would have it removed entirely. Fia sat up and hugged Daisy. "Now all I have is you. Maybe you and I should just move out of here." Hearing this, Daisy felt the situation spiraling further out of control. The next day, Daisy reported to the Duke in his study, telling him Fia was calling him Uncle now. He hadn't realized she already knew about the tree. No wonder she'd been crying so hard. For the rest of the day, no matter how hard the Duke tried to win her over, Fia refused to so much as look at him. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, the Duke pulled Fia onto his lap and apologized sincerely. "I can't bear the thought of you or Nanny Daisy getting hurt again. To me, the two of you matter far more than any tree. I'll replace every tree in the garden. We can plant an even bigger one together. But it's not that tree. No matter how many trees you plant, that one won't come back. Uncle, you really don't understand anything." She buried herself back in Daisy's arms as she spoke. Listening to her, the Duke looked like he might cry. That evening, Daisy went to talk something over with the Duke, who was still blaming himself for cutting down the tree without discussing it with Fia first, which had led to all of this. Daisy tried to comfort him. "It's unfortunate, yes, but there's no guarantee something like this wouldn't happen again anyway." She suggested that if Fia Laura had someone to lean on emotionally, she might come to terms with it faster. Daisy then recommended someone who lived nearby and was the same age as Fia Laura, the story's female second lead. If Fia had a friend her own age to play with, it would be much easier for her to work through her grief over her mother. And in the original story, this girl was the only person Fia had ever been willing to get close to, even though, in the end, they never actually did. Daisy went on to explain that there was a male lead who wanted Fialata all to himself and had isolated her from everyone else out of pure obsession, driving a wedge between her and everyone around her. So if the two girls became friends now, it would solve the male lead problem as well, at least in this instance. And Daisy could feel her own excitement building as she spoke. But the Duke frowned. Even after Fialata grows up, she never has any friends. And what if, even with a friend introduced now, They still can't get close, and it just hurts her even more. Daisy insisted firmly that the two girls would definitely become close friends. The Duke, though not entirely convinced, agreed to give it a try. Conveniently, Fialotta's birthday was coming up soon, so he decided to use the occasion to invite the second female lead over and see how things went. The next day, the Duke wrote up the invitations and sent Shadi around to deliver them to various noble households. As Shadi collected the letters, he grumbled to the Duke, "I always assumed you'd never let outsiders come to a birthday party before the young lady was grown. I've told you so many times this is overprotective, but you never once listened to me. I'm honestly shocked and pleased." Privately, Daisy thought the Duke really was an unstoppable force of nature. Since he'd never met the second female lead before, he'd decided to go check her out in person before deciding whether to invite her at all. Just then, Fia noticed Shadi heading out and asked Daisy curiously where he was going. Daisy made up an excuse, saying he was just running an errand and would be back soon. Fia said it was fine if he came back late, as long as she had Daisy. The Duke, overhearing this, was heartbroken. He reached out to her, unwilling to accept it. "Don't be like that. Come here to Papa." Fia shot him a disdainful look and buried her face in Daisy's arms instead, leaving the wounded Duke frozen in place as though turned to stone. In the days that followed, Fia wouldn't even look at the Duke, who spent his time either sulking or trailing behind the two of them. Daisy, meanwhile, not only had to keep Fia company, but also had to record everything that happened between them each day and hand the report to the Duke. She began to suspect she might work herself to death before the two of them ever made up. Unable to take it anymore, Daisy gave the Duke an idea, a trick an aunt from her past life had once taught her. "Mommy's already holding Daddy's hand. Does our little sweetheart want to hold it too?" That way the child would be naturally nudged along, and eventually the tantrums would stop on their own. At breakfast, after a real internal struggle, Daisy finally worked up the nerve. She took the Duke's hand and said to Fia, "Fialotta, let's say good morning to Papa, too. Did you sleep well, Your Grace?" To Daisy's utter shock, the Duke blushed and answered that he'd slept just fine. Wondering what on earth she was supposed to do now that she'd started this, Daisy turned to Fia and encouraged her to say good morning, too. Reluctantly, Fia mumbled, "Did you sleep well?" Then hopped off her chair and scampered away. Daisy wondered if she'd rushed things, though it was too early to call it a failure. Getting Fia to warm up to her father was only just beginning. Lost in thought, she suddenly realized her hand was still awkwardly clasped in the Duke's. The two of them had originally planned to sneak out while Fia was napping, but she caught them in the act and asked pitifully whether Daisy could stay instead. When Daisy refused, Fia snatched her bag right out of her hands. After the Duke scolded her, Fia reluctantly handed the bag back. Grumbling that her uncle was so annoying, Daisy crouched down and reassured her that she'd be back soon. Fia wiped her tears and reluctantly agreed. The Duke and Daisy arrived at the second female lead's home. She was Radizan, the second daughter of Marquis Francois. The Marquis and his wife were startled by the Duke's sudden visit, confused about what business could bring him here so early in the morning, and even more puzzled that he'd brought a woman along, unlike his usual habits. Over tea, the Duke said, "I've come today to ask whether you'd be willing to let your daughter attend my daughter's birthday celebration." Just as Daisy pulled out the invitation, the Marquis snatched it from her hands. He and his wife lit up at the sight of the Duke's personal invitation and eagerly agreed on the spot, calling for their children to come meet the Duke. But the two who showed up were the Marquis's sons. The Duke and Daisy exchanged a glance, both realizing exactly what game the old man was playing. The Duke finally said plainly, "I've come to see your daughter. For this birthday party, I only wish to invite your second daughter, Miss Radizan." Caught red-handed, the Marquis and his wife had no choice but to send for Radizan. The moment the adorable girl appeared, she instantly won over both the Duke and Daisy. The Duke warmly invited Radizan to Fialotta's birthday party. She asked hesitantly, "Would I be allowed to go by myself, without my brothers?" Daisy promised her that her new friend would welcome her with open arms and that they'd hit it off in no time. Plus, there'd be plenty of good food and fun to be had. She held out her little finger, and Radizan hooked hers around it in agreement. When the Duke and Daisy returned to the estate, Fia leapt happily into Daisy's arms. "I knew you wouldn't lie to me. This is your reward for keeping your promise." She showered Daisy's face with kisses, while the Duke watched from behind, positively green with envy. Noticing his mood, Daisy nudged Fia to give her father a kiss too. Fia said, puzzled, "But Papa has you right next to him lately. You can just kiss him." Both Daisy and the Duke froze at that. Fia looked between their stunned expressions and asked, "What's wrong, Daisy? Aren't you going to kiss him?" The two adults exchanged a glance, and not wanting to disappoint the eager look on Fia's face, Daisy told herself not to be nervous. It was just an act, nothing more. She leaned in slowly toward the Duke's cheek and gave him a completely emotionless peck. It ended with an unmistakable smacking sound, leaving them both blushing furiously. Fia was thrilled to hear a friend was coming and excitedly asked who it was. The Duke explained that Rodizanne, the daughter of Marquis Francois, would be visiting soon, and that she was the same age as Fialota. Daisy chimed in, "Oh wow, a friend is coming, that's wonderful." The Duke added, "Thinking about it, this will be your first time celebrating a birthday with a friend, won't it?" Fia's eyes lit up with excitement. But then she suddenly grew anxious, unsure what they'd even play together. Daisy reassured her that no matter what they played, they'd hit it off in no time. Rodizanne had been personally invited by her father just so Fialota could have some happy memories. The Duke hired a famous pastry chef to make the cake, and ordered plenty of pumpkin-themed trousers and pumpkin plushies made for Fia. Inside, she was overjoyed, though she put on a show of indifference and said she'd have to think about it. Just then, Shadi arrived to let the Duke know it was time for work. As he stood to leave, asking Daisy to look after Fia, he found himself unable to actually take a step. Fia had latched onto his leg. Confused, he asked what was wrong. In truth, Fia simply couldn't bear to see him go, but she made up an excuse instead, claiming she'd mixed him up with Daisy. As the Duke, resigned, prepared to leave anyway, Fia tugged at Daisy's sleeve. When Daisy bent down, Fia gave her a hug and asked her to pass it along to her father. Daisy said nervously that it would surely make Fialota's father happier if she delivered the hug herself. But in the end, Daisy couldn't withstand Fia's irresistible cuteness offensive. She walked up to the Duke and said, "Your daughter asked me to pass this along and wishes you a safe and speedy trip." Daisy stood there awkwardly in front of him, hesitating, unable to make a move, until the Duke suddenly pulled her into a hug himself. "There, that should do it. I just feel like you're the only one putting any effort into all of this. You don't have to do things you don't want to do." But Daisy's mind short-circuited, and instead she blurted out that wasn't what she meant. She wasn't unwilling. Everyone present froze at her words except Fia, who wore the smug grin of a scheme perfectly executed. That night, thoroughly mortified, Daisy flopped onto her bed, wondering why she could never keep her own mouth under control. Fia happily asked Daisy if she'd had fun today too. Daisy looked at her cheerful little face and said, "Could you maybe stop trying so hard to make Papa sad on purpose?" Fia asked, confused whether her father was really that upset, whether he hated her now. "Papa loves Fialota very much, and he'll love you very much too." Fia mumbled under her breath, "That won't work," then suddenly sat up and insisted Daisy come with her to say goodnight to the Duke. Seeing their relationship finally starting to mend, an exhilarated Daisy felt her earlier humiliation had finally paid off. When they reached the Duke's room, Fia flung her arms wide and dashed straight into his embrace. Father and daughter apologized to each other and finally reconciled. Delighted, the Duke offered to tuck her in himself tonight. But Fia declared, wide-eyed and innocent, "As a celebration of making up, let's all three sleep together tonight." Watching, deeply moved, Daisy nearly jumped out of her skin. The three of them squeezed onto the small bed, Daisy and the Duke both mortified beyond words, while Fia hugged her pumpkin plushie, positively glowing with joy. Daisy realized that the Duke, just like her, was utterly powerless against Fia's tears, and so he'd agreed to her ridiculous demand. Fia still wasn't satisfied, though, and asked why her father was facing the wall instead of turning around. She started sniffling again, insisting this was their very first time sleeping together, and the Duke had no choice but to turn and face them. Delighted, Fia wanted to chat with them both. The Duke reached across Daisy to tease his daughter, and Daisy's heart pounded nervously the entire time. Eventually, Fia lost her battle against sleepiness and drifted off. Unable to resist her curiosity, Daisy asked the Duke who Fia's mother was, and immediately regretted the question. The Duke slowly explained that Fialota was his own sister's daughter. Their parents had died young, leaving just the two of them to rely on each other. There was a 7-year age gap between them, and his sister had taken over as head of the family at just 20 years old. Back then, he'd resisted fiercely against having his sister take over the role their parents once played. Both of them were terribly stubborn, and he'd caused her no end of grief. He owed his sister debts he could never repay, and now he never would get the chance. Listening to him, Daisy could feel the guilt and endless longing he carried for his sister, and understood why he doted on Fialotta so completely. The Duke continued, I used to think Fialotta and I could handle anything together, no matter what. But after meeting you, I've started to think that might have just been an illusion. Hearing his words of recognition, Daisy felt a rush of emotion and hastily changed the subject. Looks like she's fallen asleep. You must be uncomfortable. I should get up. What if we wake her? With that, the Duke pulled Daisy close, and she felt his heartbeat against her back, her cheeks flushing red. She wondered privately, or if she turned around right now, would he have that same cool, detached expression as usual? Or would he look just as flustered as she felt? But right then, a series of embarrassingly unromantic noises broke the moment, shattering Daisy's fantasy entirely. Mortified, she explained that it wasn't her. It was the child. The next evening, Shadi looked at the two exhausted adults and asked if something was wrong. Both of them insisted they were just a little tired. Shadi said, I know exactly what's ailing you two. It's parenting fatigue syndrome. As the Duke stretched, he noticed a few bottles of fine wine sitting on the bookshelf. Shadi explained they'd been a gift from Baron Sabino a while back, and that in the private hours reserved just for adults, a drink now and then to unwind wasn't a bad idea at all, especially since tomorrow was a day off. And so the three of them sat down to drink and chat. Just as the conversation was getting lively, Fia came bounding over and told Daisy she wanted the three of them to sleep together again tonight. Daisy, flustered, said, What are you talking about? No. Fia asked, confused, whether they weren't sleepy already. The Duke made an excuse, claiming he wasn't going to sleep at all. He'd be working through the night. Fia said, quite reasonably, that the older you got, the more important it was to sleep well. The Duke, charmed by her, scooped her up and pressed his cheek forcefully against hers, making her squeal and dive into Daisy's arms for safety. Watching Fia snuggled so sweetly against Daisy, the Duke said, jealous, Fialotta, it seems like you like Nanny Daisy more than you like your own father. Daisy thought smugly to herself, that's right, I'm just that irresistible a nanny. Fia murmured quietly, Well then, Papa, you'd better hurry up and like her too. But no one quite caught what she said. She turned to Daisy and asked her to play a game together. And in the end, both Daisy and the Duke once again caved to Fia's tearful pleading. Delighted, Fia hopped down from Daisy's lap to grab some string and a deck of cards. The game was a string game, and Fia lost to Daisy, drawing a card as her penalty. Just as Daisy was wondering what the card meant, Fia planted a smacking kiss on her cheek. Apparently, wherever the heart symbol landed, that's where you had to kiss the other player. Daisy found her impossibly adorable. But from then on, Daisy lost, round after round, and the Duke couldn't resist teasing her for how badly she was playing. Daisy protested. This is my first time playing, and this should be pretty hard for you too, shouldn't it? The Duke declared confidently, I've never played either, but I'm probably better at it than you. Daisy shot back unconvinced. If you play this, I bet you won't even survive one round. While the two of them were bickering, Shadi noticed Fia had grown too sleepy to keep her eyes open and carried her off to bed. Left alone and thoroughly tipsy, the two of them decided to bet everything they had on one final round. Daisy, unsurprisingly, lost again. When it came time for the penalty, she stared at the card she'd drawn, utterly frozen. Curious, the Duke took the card from her hands and looked. The heart on the penalty card had landed right on the bear's mouth. The two of them sat there in stunned silence. Daisy suddenly jumped to her feet. It's too late, we should clean up. But having had far too much to drink, she lost her balance and toppled straight onto the Duke. Looking at her flushed face, he teased, Looks to me like you're trying to dodge your penalty, though your legs are shaking an awful lot. That remark reminded her of Fia's provocation earlier and the Duke's own taunting, and thinking of herself as someone who always followed through on her word, Daisy cupped his face in her hands. The next morning, as everyone sat down for breakfast, Shadi politely asked Daisy and the Duke what time they'd gone to sleep. At his words, Daisy flinched so hard she dropped her dinner knife, stammering, Now that you mention it, I'm actually pretty full. I'll be going now. And vanished in a flash. Fia stared, puzzled, at her untouched breakfast. From that point on, every time Daisy caught sight of the Duke, She fled as if she'd seen a ghost, leaving him feeling utterly helpless. To make matters more awkward, the Duke received a letter from a doctor, saying he'd recently formulated an insect-repellent oil and could bring some over if needed. The Duke thought to himself that since this particular doctor was so hard to get an appointment with, he ought to check with Daisy before replying, except Daisy wasn't giving him a single chance to speak to her at all. Watching her from a distance, his heart raced a little. He told himself Daisy was simply an employee his daughter happened to adore, and that he was only doing this out of concern for her safety. He walked up to Daisy, who was too nervous to even meet his eyes. Puzzled by her tense expression, he started, "Actually, about yesterday." But before he could finish, Daisy bolted off in a flash, leaving him standing there completely baffled. The Duke searched everywhere for Daisy, and finally cornered her like a predator closing in on its prey. "Are you busy right now?" Daisy played the picture of helpless fragility. "I need to go find Shadia, I'm lost." The Duke said slyly, "Shadi's out getting ready for an errand. I sent him." Daisy thought inwardly that she was done for. The Duke closed the distance and said softly, "I'm sorry." Daisy replied nervously, "Could we possibly talk about this some other time? I still need a little more time." Thinking about how he needed to reply to the doctor today, and how the weather was warming up and the bugs were multiplying, he pressed on. "I have to say this now because I can't let something like that happen again." Daisy, assuming he meant the incident from the night before, blurted out, "I swear on my own name it will never happen again." The Duke frowned, wondering what nonsense she was talking about. Swearing on her name wouldn't stop a bee sting, and continued explaining that this kind of accident could easily happen again. This time it had been her, but next time it might be him. Daisy, her face burning so hot it felt ready to catch fire, closed her eyes and said, "Yesterday that was just a mistake because I'd had too much to drink." The Duke froze for a moment, finally realizing they'd been talking about two completely different things this whole time. Daisy continued, "I'm really sorry, it's my fault for kissing you like that," and ran off again. The Duke, who had genuinely forgotten the drunken incident from that night, suddenly remembered everything thanks to Daisy's reminder, his heart racing and his face flushing red. Then it hit him what she'd actually been talking about, and he shouted after her retreating figure, "I meant the bees!" Since Fia's birthday party was fast approaching, the Duke, Daisy, and the others rode out by carriage to buy party supplies, with the Duke and Daisy sitting across from each other, both too embarrassed to make eye contact. Just as Daisy was about ready to leap out of the moving carriage from the awkwardness, Fia took it upon herself to strike up conversation, easing the tension inside. The carriage stopped in front of a shop where the owner had already prepared an assortment of goods for the Duke. Decorations, plushies, tableware, everything needed for the party. Fia eagerly pulled Shadi off to browse the merchandise, leaving the Duke and Daisy behind, both breaking into a cold sweat. They'd each wanted to go with Fia, but she'd firmly insisted on going with Shadi instead. Shadi teased, "You're acting so strange today, my lady. Usually you don't even glance my way." Fia, sneaking a glance back over her shoulder, said, "What are you talking about, Shadi? I like you a lot, I just never said it before." Then she turned and called out to Daisy, "Daisy, let Papa pick something out for you." Daisy stood there awkwardly, unsure what to do. At that, the Duke broke the silence and told Daisy he'd actually called her here today because there was something he wanted to give her. Someone came forward carrying a small box for Daisy. She opened it and found her own necklace inside. The Duke had quietly had it sent here to be repaired. Daisy said, delighted, "I thought you'd thrown it away. Why, thank you. Don't thank me. I'm the one who should apologize for breaking it in the first place." The two of them looked at each other, the air suddenly charged. The Duke said, a little awkwardly, "You're good at just about everything, except judging people." Daisy just lowered her head and murmured agreement. Just as Daisy was debating whether to apologize for the day before, a bearded noble walked in. The Duke lit up at the sight of him and went over to shake his hand. It was Count Santorini, recently returned from abroad. Hearing the same surname as a place on the map, Daisy suddenly remembered this was the character she'd created for a friend who had never gotten a proper vacation in her life. A legendary thief with no equal, and at the same time a merciless crime lord who ruled the underworld with an iron fist. At the thought, Daisy dragged the Duke into a nearby changing room. In the cramped space, she caught a whiff of his cologne, and blushed at the thought that she now, entirely by accident, knew exactly what scent he wore. the Duke asked, bewildered. What's this about? Don't tell me you want to finish the game of hide-and-seek we didn't get to finish yesterday. Daisy excitedly explained that the man who'd just walked in was the grandfather of one of the male leads. But the Duke looked puzzled. The Count never married in his life. He spent nearly his entire life on the battlefield. So could there be a hidden child or some family no one knows about? The Count's life has been completely above board, both publicly and privately, so there couldn't possibly be any unknown blood relatives. Hearing his confident answer, Daisy wasn't entirely sure anymore whether she'd simply misremembered. But any lead was worth chasing, and it was better than the twist turning out to be that he really was the male lead after all. Just then, light spilled into the cramped changing room. Shoddy and an attendant stared, stunned, at the Duke, and Daisy squeezed inside together. Daisy shouted, mortified, "This is a misunderstanding!" Back at the estate, Daisy sat by Fia's bed, frustrated with herself. It seemed like every time she tried to do anything at all, someone ended up misunderstanding her. Still, spending time with Fia always made her happy, and she started thinking about tidying up the little one's scattered toys. That was when she noticed the punishment card from the night before, and thinking of all the trouble it had caused her, she went to put it away, only to notice it looked different from the one before. She examined the card more closely and eventually realized there was no heart on it at all, even though it was supposedly identical to the one from the previous night. Looking closer still, she found faint traces of erasing and rewriting on the card. That was when she recalled that when she and her fellow authors had written the heroine's personality, they'd agreed on a scheming, secretly cunning persona, making her both a master strategist and a mistress of deception. Daisy stared, stunned, at the sleeping Fia, wondering if this had all been her doing. The next morning, Fia personally prepared a drink to welcome roadies on, and had Daisy taste test it first. Daisy figured she'd have to pretend it was good even if it wasn't, but to her surprise, it was genuinely delicious. Watching Fia's earnest efforts, the Duke was deeply moved, clearly seeing just how much she was looking forward to Rodizan's visit. When the Duke went to pour Fia another glass, she turned it down. "You two can finish the rest. I'm going to go clean my room." Touched by how much Fia had matured, the Duke didn't notice anything off. But Daisy did. Normally, Fia would go to any length for an extra glass of her favorite drink, and here she was refusing it outright. As the original author, watching her play these little scheming games was exhilarating in its own way, except when the target of her scheming happened to be Daisy and the Duke himself. But what if something actually happened between me and the Duke, Daisy thought? Then I'd become Fia's stepmother. Heavens, is the secret heroine of this story trying to make me her stepmother? The Duke, noticing Daisy's blank, stunned expression, asked what was wrong. Just as Daisy was floundering with embarrassment, Shoddy swept in and picked Fia up despite her protests, then went off to report to the Duke. Fia, unable to resist, was furious, grumbling that Shoddy was absolutely useless when it came to her life plans. That afternoon, Fia dragged Daisy and the Duke into a game of hide-and-seek, only to use it as an excuse to lock the two of them inside a wardrobe together. They figured a wardrobe was private enough for a serious conversation, so they started discussing their investigation into Count Santorini, the location and timing of that secret meeting they'd learned about, and their plan to go investigate. Daisy was thrilled at the idea of joining him. Hearing that, the Duke looked visibly rattled and clearly didn't want to bring her along. Daisy insisted she knew a great deal and would definitely be useful. The Duke said sternly, "I've always been someone who demands perfection. I simply cannot stand the thought of you walking into danger completely unprepared. I cannot stand—" Just as Daisy, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the Duke's presence, was fumbling for words, Shoddy's voice came from outside. Fia was desperately trying to hold him back. He wanted to race her to see who could find the two of them first. Just as Shoddy was about to open the wardrobe, an enraged Fia actually kicked him in the leg, which earned her a stern scolding from the Duke, who told her to go apologize to Shoddy. Watching Fia look so pitiful, Daisy's heart ached, and she wanted to go comfort her, but the Duke sternly stopped her. Left with no choice, Daisy retreated to her room to rest. Just as she was about to draw the curtains, she glanced out the window and saw Shoddy and Fia sitting side by side on the front steps. And even more puzzling, Fia was letting him pet her head. Daisy couldn't understand how the two of them had grown so close in such a short time. It turned out that a few hours earlier, Fia had gone to find Shoddy and tearfully apologized. He'd crouched down and reassured her, "It's fine. It didn't hurt at all. But you've been acting strange lately. Why do you keep leaving your father and Daisy alone together? Is it because you don't want to be with Daisy anymore? Fia protested angrily. That's not it at all. I love Daisy so much, and nobody loves Daisy more than I do. Shadi said, How could that be true? I love big sister Daisy a lot too. Fia was stunned. Could Shadi have feelings for Daisy too? Anxiously, she said, No, Daisy is supposed to marry my father. To her surprise, Shadi agreed wholeheartedly. Don't worry, my lady, we're on the same team here. I think the Duke and Daisy should be together too. Miss Daisy is kind, brave, and gorgeous. I really think she'd make a perfect other half for the Duke. Delighted to learn Shadi shared her exact thinking, Fia was thrilled, and the two of them happily formed an alliance, ready to ship the Duke and Daisy together. Fia complained to Shadi about how exhausting it had been trying to bring them together, and Shadi told her that her matchmaking methods had a flaw, then switched into expert mode, explaining that the two of them needed to genuinely like each other first, and right now, they had no idea whether the Duke even liked Daisy at all. Fia declared confidently that the Duke definitely liked her. Since everyone else in the household adored Daisy, surely her father did too. Shadi couldn't help but laugh wryly at her logic, though thinking it over, he supposed the Duke probably did like her after all. Then he raised another question. Did Daisy like the Duke back? She always seemed to be avoiding him. Why was that? Fia was troubled by this with no clever solution in mind, and sincerely asked Shadi for help figuring out a plan. Shadi closed his eyes in thought while Fia waited eagerly beside him. Thinking about how much fun it would be to ship the Duke and Daisy together, Shadi broke into a mischievous grin and leaned in to whisper his plan into Fia's ear, her face lighting up with anticipation. And so the official Get the Duke Married alliance was formed. Fia insisted on a formal ceremony to seal their partnership, leaning her head forward and letting Shadi pat it 3 times to make it official. Delighted, Shadi happily patted her chestnut round head. The next morning, Daisy crept quietly toward Fia's room, only to be startled when Fia, already wide awake, burst out and gave her a fright. Daisy immediately pulled her into a hug. Fia explained that since today was the day her friend was arriving, her father had come by earlier too, saying he'd barely slept because he was so nervous. Silly man, I slept just fine. You shouldn't call Papa silly, Daisy said, thinking that, well, today was Fia's birthday and her very first time making a friend, so it was understandable that the Duke hadn't slept well either. Just then, Fia noticed the small box Daisy had brought with her. Daisy explained it was a gift for her. Fia asked eagerly, Can I open it? Once given permission, she excitedly tore it open and found her favorite pumpkin cake inside. So happy she practically leapt into the air. Everyone at the estate came to wish Fia a happy birthday, and the mood was joyous. But unexpectedly, the Marquis and his wife had tagged along with Rodizan to the party as well, wanting to attend Fia's celebration. Both the Duke and Daisy were caught off guard. The couple kept saying awkward, ill-timed things, blocking Rodizan from view, and thoroughly disrupting the mood of the party until Fia looked ready to burst into tears. Daisy was furious at the pair's presumptuousness. The invitation had clearly been for Rodizan alone, yet the two of them had shown up regardless of etiquette. The Duke asked bluntly, Did you bring the invitation with you? It only had Rodizan's name on it. He added sharply that showing up uninvited to an event was terribly rude, and had them escorted onto a carriage. Rodizan, without her parents around anymore, dropped her earlier reserve and warmly greeted Fia herself. Fia, too shy to say anything, left everyone rather surprised. They'd never seen her act shy before. Just then, Rodizan's attendant reminded her she could bring out the gift she'd prepared. Snapping back to attention, Rodizan pulled it out and handed it to Fia. Daisy gently reminded Fia to say thank you, and she finally remembered her manners. The Duke scooped both girls up together and started the joyful birthday celebration. Since it was a long walk from the estate gates to the main hall, he carried Fia and Rodizan the whole way. Daisy watched the two little girls and thought about how, in the original story, they'd ended up cold and distant toward each other because of one of the male leads. Surely that wouldn't happen now, and the two of them would grow up inseparable, unlike in the book. Daisy and the Duke peeked through a doorway, spying on the two girls inside. Fia was mixing a drink for Rodizan, and the two of them were whispering secrets to each other. Just as Daisy and the Duke were leaning in to listen more closely, Fia heard a noise and the two of them hurriedly ducked into a storage room. Fia came out to check but found nothing amiss and went back inside, leaving the Duke and Daisy to slip once more into their cramped hiding spot. The Duke mentioned that Countess Raphael had apparently given birth the day before, a boy with red eyes. Since the child's arrival, the Count had apparently thrown himself into his scholarly research even harder. Daisy said, delighted. When you were entertaining the Count and Countess that day, I thought something big was about to happen. The Duke asked, puzzled. Were you worried I might do something bad? Daisy said, playing coy. How could I have possibly thought that? The Duke smiled. I thought we understood each other pretty well by now. Daisy's heart raced at the sight of his smile. He added, Next time, I promise I'll tell you in advance whatever I'm worried about. Just as the warmth was building in that cramped little space, Fia suddenly threw the door open, hitting Daisy square on the head with a loud bump. Furious, Fia declared, It's your fault for getting in my way, so you got punished for it. You're both adults. Why won't you behave? With that, she dragged Radazan off to the Hall of Mirrors. Everyone in the household had dressed up in their finest, and the mirror room had been elaborately decorated for Fia's party. She pushed the door open. The entire room was filled with pumpkin decorations, an absolute pumpkin wonderland. Just as Daisy was marveling at the sheer number of pumpkins, she spotted something remarkable, a huge object behind the Duke, draped in a white sheet. Fia ran over curiously and asked what was inside. This is your gift from Papa, he said, whipping off the white sheet to reveal an exquisitely crafted fountain. Fia and Radazan ran over excitedly, and seeing how inviting the water looked, they dove right in and started drinking straight from it. Daisy hurried to pull them out, startled, only to discover it was actually sweet, delicious pumpkin juice. Daisy thought about how wasteful this whole indulgent old world was. In her past life, she'd only ever seen a 3-tiered chocolate fountain once. The Duke had actually considered building an enormous fountain in the artificial lake in the courtyard, but decided against it, worried it wasn't very hygienic. He and Shadi admired their handiwork and decided they'd move this fountain into Fia's room afterward, so she'd always have her favorite drink on hand. Fia and Radazan crawled all over the fountain together, having a wonderful time. Then the chef arrived carrying the pumpkin cake, and everyone sang happy birthday to Fia. Daisy had never seen her look so happy, so genuinely joyful. By nightfall, the party had come to an end, and Fia and Radazan said their reluctant goodbyes at the front gate, ending up hugging each other and crying, promising to play together again soon. The Duke and Daisy, watching the two girls, felt deeply reassured. After the two of them got Fia to sleep, Daisy's nerves were on edge. The day of the secret meeting was fast approaching, and just thinking about infiltrating this mysterious guild's clandestine gathering made her anxious. As she tried to psych herself up, the Duke walked in wearing a black shirt and draped a black cloak over her shoulders, instructing her not to leave his side no matter what happened. Touched by his sincerity, her heart melted, though she still put on a brave face. Don't worry about me. I'll be more helpful than ever this time. In that moment, she felt truly confident. Since this particular male lead had been created by a friend of hers who taught mathematics, she'd woven in his favorite foods, songs, and travel destinations. Knowing these details would surely be easier to trace than some vague name or face. The two of them set off in the carriage, Daisy full of confidence about the mission ahead. When they arrived at the location for the secret meeting, it turned out to be a tavern, one that felt oddly familiar to Daisy since she'd been there once before. She'd expected some basement or abandoned warehouse, not this bustling place. The patrons all looked perfectly ordinary, while the Duke's refined bearing seemed to radiate an aura impossible to hide, no matter where he went. Just then, a tall figure delivered 2 mugs of beer to their table. Daisy turned and was startled to recognize the Duke's own guard captain. The Duke told her to calm down. This was all standard procedure. Sneaking glances around the room, Daisy realized the people scattered here and there, drinking in 2s and 3s, were all actually members of Duke Hunston's household staff, which left her utterly frozen in shock. She recalled what the Duke had told her about being a perfectionist and thought, he must have done all this for my safety. For me? The more she thought about it, the more her cheeks flushed and her heart raced. Just then, they noticed a table of people who had quietly slipped away without anyone noticing when. The Duke exchanged a glance with Daisy. The two of them clearly hadn't just gone to the restroom together. Daisy happened to know that this particular tavern had a staircase leading down to the basement, the perfect setting for a dark, secretive meeting. The Duke asked, puzzled, how she knew that. Daisy explained that Pooley had once had too much to drink and tumbled down those very stairs. When he asked who Pooley was, Daisy said, exasperated, that she was the fool who'd sold her necklace. The Duke finally placed the name, murmuring, "I had no idea you two had ever been to a place like this together." Daisy froze, worried he'd gotten the wrong idea, and hastily explained she'd only come here once for a work gathering with her old restaurant colleagues. Just then, the Duke spotted someone heading toward the stairs. The two of them rose quickly to follow, with the Duke instructing Daisy to stay close. They crept down the stairs together, and behind a door they could hear the murmur of voices. The Duke told Daisy to be careful and went ahead to check first. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing, their hands had found their way together, and they peered through the door together to observe the scene inside. All they could make out was that the guild leader wore a red cloak, his face obscured. He pulled out a photograph and instructed his subordinate to carry out some unsavory task. When the subordinate hesitated to refuse, the leader's expression twisted into something menacing, and the terrified subordinate quickly agreed. Daisy caught the name of the guild scheduled for the next meeting, something like Mal something, and immediately guessed it must be Maldives. This guild had to be connected to the Santorini male lead. Then they heard someone inside ask whether the leader's son's fever had gotten any better. The leader answered that it had, then casually removed the hood, revealing a woman with her hair tied back in a blue ponytail. Daisy watched as the woman pulled out a throwing knife and, with a single flick, sent it flying straight into a rat. She thought to herself that this male lead's mother was truly a frightening woman. Feeling they'd learned enough, the Duke led Daisy away to leave quickly. But the moment they made it back upstairs, they found themselves surrounded on all sides. "Who are you two? How did you come up from down there?" Daisy tensed at the scene. Clearly, these weren't ordinary patrons. The ringleader shouted arrogantly, "Cat got your tongue? Why won't you answer?" The Duke, thoroughly unimpressed by this man's rudeness, simply said, "Move." The thug couldn't believe his ears. The Duke radiated an aura so terrifying it made the air feel heavy. "Do I need to say it twice? Move." The surrounding thugs shrank back uneasily, but their leader, oblivious to how much danger he was in, slammed his fist on the table. "Ha! Some people just don't know when to listen to reason. You don't look like ordinary customers either. Show your faces. I'd suggest you two take off those hoods before I peel the skin right off them." To everyone's shock, the Duke actually complied, slowly pulling back his hood to reveal a face that had no business appearing in a place like this. "Holy hell, is he insane?" The thug slammed the table again, hard. "Shut it. To think someone this important would show up in a dump like this. You can't possibly be here looking to join our guild, so you must be here to get something done." Terrible timing, though. You picked a spot crawling with eyes and ears. This is indeed my first time here. And yes, this really isn't the kind of place I belong. This certainly isn't somewhere a hothouse flower like you should be lingering, otherwise by tomorrow all of Pontypool. No, the entire country, will be talking about how the noble Duke Hunston went slumming in a back alley with his secret mistress. Some tired old cliché of a story that'll be common knowledge by dawn. He grabbed Daisy by the shoulder as he spoke, looking toward the Duke. "Then again, you've got plenty of money, don't you? Enough to buy everyone's silence and then some." Watching the man handle Daisy so roughly, the Duke's temper flared visibly. "If I were here on private business, sure, that might work. But today I'm here on official business, so take your hand off her immediately, and I'll let you keep your life." Furious, the thug turned back to his men. "Are you all just going to stand there? Shouldn't you be teaching this noble a lesson?" But the others had already been cowed into stillness by the murderous glint in the Duke's eyes, hesitating to step forward. The Duke taunted, "You've missed your last chance. Even your own men have abandoned you." The enraged thug lunged at the Duke anyway, but at that moment, the door burst open with a crash as a wave of Pontypool knights stormed in. "The ringleader's down here. Don't let a single one of them escape. Arrest them all." The Duke, his arm around Daisy, walked out to a street already buzzing with gossip about the hooded couple. "That guy, I feel like I've seen him somewhere. Oh my God, isn't that the Duke? What's the Duke doing here?" Daisy thought nervously that while the Duke might be used to scenes like this, she certainly wasn't. Voices kept drifting into her ears. But who's that beside him? He's holding her so gently. Could it be that the Duke has finally... Daisy pushed through the burning stairs surrounding them and finally made it to the carriage. Once inside, Daisy finally let out a breath of relief. The Duke asked softly, "Were you frightened? It took a little time to get the knights stationed nearby into the city discreetly." But at least we were prepared, just in case. I thought I already understood how powerful you were. Clearly, I was completely wrong. The Duke looked at her, still trembling. That's exactly why I insisted on going myself. It's fine, I really didn't expect a whole knight regiment to show up. That's exactly my point. I didn't expect you to go to such lengths either. Didn't I already tell you? I can't stand knowing there's danger and just letting it happen without doing anything. Did you really foresee all of that happening? No, I'm no fortune teller, but I did plan for the worst-case scenario. I want to shield you from every danger that could ever come near you. If I hadn't gone tonight, I wouldn't have needed to mobilize the entire Pontypridd Knight Regiment. As things stand now, I can't keep pretending I don't know anything anymore. I understand you're treating me differently than anyone else. Just as Daisy was about to speak, the Duke beat her to it. There's one more thing I need to tell you. I'd actually thought about not saying anything at all, but I still feel like I ought to set the record straight. He hesitated, blushing, before saying, "What I meant was about the bees." Watching her utterly bewildered expression, he covered his face and continued. That day at the wine cellar, that morning I wasn't quite myself. I couldn't remember anything that had happened the night before, which is why I acted that way. Daisy was stunned. Good heavens, so he really hadn't remembered anything. No wonder he'd seemed so strange back then. You kept pressing me about what happened the day before, and I told you this time it was you, but next time it might be me. All of that. I was talking about the bees the whole time. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. Once he finished, both their faces were burning hot enough to fry an egg. Daisy tried to break the tension. No, honestly, you didn't have to explain. I don't want to be dishonest, especially not with you. We're going to be doing a lot more together going forward. And it'll only get more complicated if things stay awkward between us. So that's what this was about. Okay, I understand. Listening to him, Daisy felt a small pang of disappointment. Of course, he really wasn't the same kind of person as her. Even though she'd had relationships before in her time, kissing was still something she wasn't very experienced with. Wouldn't the Duke feel awkward too? Then again, he'd probably dealt with plenty of noble ladies in his time. He was young, handsome, wealthy, and powerful. Inexplicably, that stung a little. Anyway, I really am sorry for being so improper with you. Please just forget the whole thing. To Daisy's utter shock, the Duke replied, blushing, "Why would I want to forget it? That was my first time. I've been so busy looking after the child, I've never had the time for that sort of thing. Is that really so strange? That's because you're a wealthy, powerful, handsome Duke. It would be far stranger if you hadn't." Really? Even when Chestnut was that small and adorable, I probably wouldn't have looked twice at any noble lady. Daisy suddenly thought of Fia's scheming streak. Could this be one of Chestnut's little plots too? Shadi and Fia saw the Duke and Daisy return, and Fia immediately tried to run to Daisy, but Shadi stopped her. "What are you doing, Shadi? Put me down." "My lady, look." Just then, the Duke was seen helping Daisy down from the carriage, their manner strikingly intimate. Shadi and Fia watched with barely contained excitement, but just then, they heard the household staff preparing to welcome the Duke back. Shadi held Fia up. "Let's make a plan. We're partners in this, right? You'll help me?" "Of course, we're partners." Shadi turned Fia toward the servants heading out to greet them. "Hold them back for a bit, can you?" Fia said confidently, "Leave it to me," and blocked everyone's path. "Everyone stay inside." The staff looked utterly bewildered. Right as the Duke and Daisy, both still blushing, walked in. On the third day, Daisy asked the Duke, puzzled about what he'd told her, that the woman worked as a healer in a mercenary company called the Alps. The guild leader's mother was named Santorini and ran the Maldives Guild, and now there was an Alps mercenary company on top of it. Just how badly did this family want a vacation? Apparently, ever since her mother's death, the current guild leader had been living with his son. Why would they hide their identities from the Count, though? Wasn't there a chance the Count could actually help them? It's less that they're hiding their identities from each other, and more that they don't even seem to know their family. No. Actually, the guild leader probably does know, since that child is destined to become the future guild leader male lead, and his name is literally Guild Leader Santorini. He must have heard something from his mother at some point. If he truly had no idea, there's no way he'd be using that name. Though I can't rule out that he's deliberately playing dumb for some reason of his own. Think about it. Count Santorini earned his title through his own achievements. If there really is some connection between them, people would come crawling out of the woodwork trying to attach themselves to that family name, no matter which side they came from. My basic principle is never to trust anyone with a criminal record, especially not someone who was once part of a guild like that. Daisy reached out to pour the Duke some tea, only to have him beat her to it. No, let me pour for you instead. Thank you. Daisy blushed as she watched him pour her tea, thinking she'd only ever seen him pour water for Fialotta a handful of times before. The two of them kept talking about Count Santorini. He was a man who loved children deeply. The very first thing he'd done after being granted his title was donate to an orphanage. Despite looking like a hardened mercenary who'd spent his life on the battlefield, he had the heart of a kindly old grandfather. Daisy took a sip of her tea. Maybe the most adorable kid in the whole world could end up being some help here. At that exact moment, Fia, who was off painting somewhere, scratched her ear in confusion. Feels like someone's talking about me. The next day, the Duke invited the Count to visit the estate. Seeing Fia's hairstyle delighted him. Ha, that's the hairstyle they give you when you join the mercenaries, and here I am seeing it on a little lady. Startled, Fia buried herself in Daisy's arms, and Daisy soothed her gently. It's all right, Fialotta. She'd misjudged the situation. She'd been afraid of the Count, when the plan had been to let him see how adorable Chestnut was and let the conversation about family come up naturally. Seeing the Duke's daughter reminds me of the old days. Every new recruit who joined the mercenaries had to have their hair shaved into that same style. But nobody ever wore it as well as this little lady does. Fia peeked back at him, only to be startled again by his exuberant expression. Fialotta, remember your manners. Come down and sit properly in your chair. The Count laughed it off. No harm done. You shouldn't scold her. When I visit the orphanage, most of the children take one look at me and burst into tears. Just then, Fia noticed the Count's enormous white beard and asked timidly, Are you a sheep man? Ha. The Count roared with laughter and joked, Now that's a surprise coming from a young lady, but actually I'm not a sheep. I just really like sheep, so I've been secretly raising one on my chin. You're the very first person to spot it at a glance, my lady. Fia ran right up to him. Can I pet Grandpa's sheep? Of course you can, my lady. My sheep absolutely loves making new friends. Fia gently reached out and stroked his beard. Hey. So soft. It's like a cloud sheep. Grandpa, sheep live in flocks and eat grass and leaves, right? You even know that? You're very clever, my lady. Right then, the Count's stomach let out a loud growl. Fia patted his beard gently. That sounds pretty loud. The sheep must be hungry. Thinking that a hungry sheep might collapse, she reached for the broccoli on her plate and tucked it right into the Count's beard. The Duke shot to his feet in alarm. Fialotta, you can't be so rude to a guest. Daisy hurried over to scoop Fia up, who protested, but the sheep needs to eat too. The Count, however, was thoroughly delighted. Ha, heavens, she's absolutely adorable. It's no trouble at all, old man like me. She just wanted to feed the sheep, that's all. The Duke said, relieved. I'm glad it didn't upset you. I'm sorry I didn't catch that in time. Fialotta, you can't do that again next time. Watching the three of them together, so full of warmth, the Count felt deeply moved. After dinner, the Count swirled the wine in his glass and said, I really don't know how to thank you enough, Your Grace. I've spent most of my life alone, rarely part of gatherings like this. Having a family really is wonderful. I know, for someone like me who's had to live and move alone as a mercenary, family is a luxury I never thought I'd have. Whenever I see a sweet child like this, I can't help but wonder what it would be like if I had a grandchild of my own. Tonight would probably be even more joyful. Of course, it's far too late for that kind of wish now. You do have blood relatives, Count, a daughter and a grandson. The Count turned back, startled. What are you talking about? Back when you served in the Alps Mercenary Company, weren't you once involved with a woman? In the dungeon, the guild leader was shaking the bars of her cell furiously. Hurry up and open this door, damn it. Bring my son to me right now. Just then, the Duke walked in, pulled out a key, and unlocked the cell. What is going on here? Why did the knights suddenly show up? Why did you take my son? I apologize for taking your son without asking, but does arresting an illegal guild require an explanation? If your goal was to arrest me, there was no reason you had to take my son too. What exactly are you trying to do, and why are you doing this to us? Because you and your son could have a significant impact on my daughter's future. What? The guild leader had no idea what he meant. Just then, the Count walked in, leading a young boy by the hand. The guild leader rushed over and wrapped her arms around him. "My boy, are you hurt?" The Count spoke up suddenly. "Are you Andy Nalata?" The guild leader eyed him warily. "Who are you? Do you know me?" "Selin Nelita. Was your mother's name Selin Nalata?" He pulled out a locket, inside of which was a photograph of a woman. The guild leader's whole body trembled, and she asked, disbelieving, "What kind of trick is this? Who are you? How do you have a photo of my late mother?" Hearing the guild leader confirm she really was Selin's daughter, the Count froze completely where he stood. Just then, Daisy burst in. You call him Count Santorini?" The guild leader's entire body radiated a terrifying aura as her eyes went wide with fury. "My mother only ever mentioned that name once before she died. Santorini. Ha, I never realized you were such a distinguished nobleman." By this point, the Count could barely stand, collapsing to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Do I really have a daughter?" "Before I tear that mouth of yours to shreds, I'd suggest you shut it. What exactly is someone who never once took responsibility doing right now? Has your precious noble family run out of heirs or something? Don't make me laugh. I don't know you. And I never want to. You're the man who indirectly abandoned my son too. The Count never abandoned you or your mother. It was only because of his life as a traveling mercenary that he had to leave for a while. And during that time, your mother left that place on her own. You said you'd heard the name Santorini before. Did your mother ever say a single bad word about your father?" Andy, the guild leader, finally calmed down a little. "It's too late. My mother worked herself to the bone her whole life, and now that she's finally gone, you show up? None of this matters anymore." "That's not true. If you keep clinging to this so stubbornly, you might not even get the chance to watch your own child grow up safely." In the original story, the guild leader male lead was written as an orphan with no family at all. If the story stayed on its original course, Andy Nalata would never get to watch her child grow up and would pass away before long. Even knowing how difficult it would be to make Andy understand she was living inside the pages of a book, Daisy refused to give up and kept pressing. Growing up without parents, all alone, is that really what you want for your own child? I know how much you resent your father. But what matters right now? In her final moments, your mother must have only wanted you to be happy, because that's exactly how my own mother felt too. Andy froze, suddenly remembering her mother's words on her deathbed. "Andy, thank you for coming into the life of someone as unworthy as me to be your mother. The moment you were born, I believed in the heavens above. And I hoped even more that you would be happy. I wanted to watch over you forever. Please forgive this mother of yours, who has to leave her child behind and go on ahead." At that, the Count could no longer contain his emotions. "I'm sorry, my daughter. All of this is my fault. I'm sorry, truly, I'm so sorry." Watching this heartbreaking scene unfold, Daisy found herself thinking of her own mother, and her eyes welled with tears she quietly wiped away, turning her face aside. The Duke took her hand and gently brushed the tears from her cheeks, then pulled her into his arms. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Daisy broke down and sobbed against him. On the third day, Daisy stared at the thick stack of documents in her hands, completely lost. The Duke sipped his tea and explained they were admission papers to a knight academy. "With this, the guild leader should come around, don't you think?" "Is this for the boy, the male lead?" The Duke let out a short laugh. "Or maybe it's for the Count." Even though sending a future villain off to join the knights still left a long road ahead before any real reconciliation, at least mother and son were now safely settled at the Count's estate, and the guild had been disbanded. The Count apparently planned to formally adopt them both into the family before sending his grandson off to the academy. I don't think he'd adjust well to a school full of noble children, which is why I arranged this instead. Ah, that makes sense. Would a knight academy really be so different? Full boarding, strict discipline, a place built on obedience and command. After all, it's a place for wielding swords, known for its harsh military code. But it also values camaraderie more than almost anywhere else, and the bonds between seniors and juniors run deep. I hear the boy takes after the Count and shows real promise. This path might suit him well. Daisy agreed, thinking this really did sound like the best option for the child. And if things went according to plan, he'd never cross paths with Chestnut at all. But what about the guild leader? I mean Andy. Surely she won't go back to running the guild. The Count won't just stand by and do nothing. Now that he's finally found his daughter, He'll help her get back on the right track and find happiness. And honestly, I haven't given up on keeping an eye on things either. With the two of them settled at the Count's estate, it'll be far easier to track their movements. Daisy looked at the Duke, radiating confidence. So, Your Grace, Dane, call me Dane. The Duke, blushing, forced out an explanation. Back at the tavern, you kept calling me Duke. If we're going to be doing things like this together again, you should practice using my name. Daisy hesitated, worried. This was a society built on strict class hierarchy, and he was a duke, second only to the emperor himself. Could a commoner like her really just call him by his given name? Just then, a gust of wind blew a strand of her hair across her lips, and it somehow gave her the resolve she needed. Just as she was about to say his name, the Duke noticed the strand of hair and smiled faintly, reaching out to flick it. Ah! Daisy blushed so hard she felt like she might combust, assuming he must be teasing her, wondering if she'd been eating her own hair out of hunger. It's just the wind. Before she could finish, the Duke's motion cut her off. He reached out and gently brushed the hair from her face, saying softly, "You've worked hard these past weeks. It might get even harder from here." Daisy, her whole face crimson, said, "Your Grace isn't... Dane is the one who's had it hard." Hearing her call him by name, the Duke lit up. "There we go. Oh, that reminds me." He handed her a large sack. "This should have come yesterday, but I couldn't find the right moment. Your wages. You've been here a full month now." Daisy stared at the gold coins glittering inside, startled. "But these aren't silver coins. These are gold. I told you, if you did well, I'd pay you 10 times over. Did you forget that already?" So it hadn't just been an offhand remark, and it hadn't meant he wanted her dead either, apparently. Sitting at his desk, the Duke found himself with a persistent headache. He kept catching himself staring at Daisy's lips, unable to figure out why. Unless he'd actually lost his mind, there was no reasonable explanation for behavior like this. Nothing like it had ever happened to him in his entire life. And yet he couldn't stop thinking about how beautiful her smile was, like a flower blooming in springtime. Beautiful. Was that what I just said? No, wait, was that what I was thinking? Baffled by his own thoughts, the Duke summoned Shoddy. "Do I have a lot on my plate lately?" "Honestly, sir, your workload has actually gone down quite a bit recently. Are you preoccupied with something else these days?" Hearing the insinuation in Shoddy's tone, the Duke felt a flash of guilt and quickly changed the subject. "Where's Violetta? She said today marks Daisy's 30th day here, and she wants to give her a gift. She's off painting right now." 30 days already, time to get a gift then. Meanwhile, Fia had surprisingly turned down an invitation to go to the market with Daisy. Daisy was a little confused, but didn't think much of it, figuring some time alone wouldn't be so bad either. Ah, is that smell of money really coming from my own pocket? Payday really does call for spending like there's no tomorrow. Excited, she walked into the same shop as before. "So, I'd like to buy a gift." "A gift? And who might this be for? A child and a young man." "As it happens, we've prepared some items I think the young lady might like." "How about this one? It's a handmade headband, stitched by hand, and the ear section is padded with soft cotton, so it's comfortable to wear." This was clearly made just for Chestnut. "I'll take it. How could I not, given how perfectly it matches her taste?" The shopkeeper smiled. "Actually, we only got one of these in. I set it aside on purpose. Would you like to see anything else?" "Show me, please." Daisy went on to buy a few more gifts, and once she'd finished, the shopkeeper quickly picked up on the situation. It really is hard to pick a gift for that particular someone, isn't it? He pulled out a fountain pen. "How about this one? It was imported straight from the Delsu continent. Lapis lazuli with this kind of clarity is quite rare, and among similar items, this one is the finest we carry." Daisy looked at the gemstone set into the pen. It was almost exactly the color of Dane's eyes. Even though it was a bit pricey, it was absolutely worth it, and she decided to buy it. Walking out of the shop with her arms full, she muttered to herself, "Ugh, why did I end up buying this much?" She then headed over to the restaurant where she used to work, greeting the place cheerfully as she walked in. "Auntie!" "Oh my goodness, who is this? Isn't this Daisy? It's been so long. Auntie's not too busy right now, don't worry, there's always a place for you here." "Daisy, haven't you heard anything? About the person who made the Duke fall head over heels? Fall in love?" Daisy blinked, utterly lost. "What on earth are you talking about?" You must have heard about the knights raiding that illegal guild recently, right? Well, apparently he went there to rescue someone. Heavens, nobody knows who she is, but everyone who was there that day says she was stunningly beautiful. Even under that hood, you could tell she was gorgeous. Some people are even saying she must be the most beautiful woman in the entire empire. And if that man really was Duke Hunston, what does that even mean? It's not even that strange when you think about it. What does it mean? Though really, what on earth does it mean? Listening to the auntie's rambling, Daisy started coughing violently. Rumors really could get out of hand. She'd been the only one there with the Duke that night. The auntie, not noticing anything odd about Daisy's expression, kept chattering excitedly. Everyone's been talking about it lately. You really haven't heard anything? There was a fresh update just yesterday. Just then, a man at a nearby table turned around, looking rather pleased with himself. Well, I heard from my neighbor's cousin's partner that the Duke's lover is actually a princess from some faraway kingdom. Daisy felt the whole room spin. What on earth was going on now? She shot to her feet. Look at the time. I should get back to keep the young lady company. Auntie, I need to head out. I'll come back another time. Bye. Shadi arrived to deliver a message to the Duke, only to find Fia there too, sulking over her drawing. Ugh, I really wanted to go out with Daisy today too. Why am I so busy? Shadi walked over and teased her. If you'd finished this earlier, you could have gone out with Daisy to the market. This isn't something you can just dash off. Sometimes it takes a whole day to finish just one piece. Don't you know that, Shadi? All right, I get it. Art is agony, you know. It's exhausting work, and besides, Daisy needs her rest too. Wow, my lady, I can't believe you just said that. That's genuinely impressive. Fia gave a cute little huff. I need to focus now. Go do your own work. All right, got it. Charmed by her, Shadi went off to discuss real business with the Duke. Before long, Fia had finished her drawing. Papa, look at this, look. This first one is me and a pumpkin. This second one is a sheep eating broccoli. He won't eat pumpkin, only broccoli. Why would you only feed the sheep broccoli? Won't he get hungry? This next one is Daisy and you. How about it? Pretty impressive, right? I did a good job, didn't I? You're getting better and better. I can tell in every single one. Your technique isn't quite refined yet, but you're working so hard. Do you think Daisy will like this gift? Of course she'll be thrilled. The Duke patted her head. You really do love Daisy that much, huh? Fia suddenly leapt off the Duke's lap. Daisy's back! The Duke sighed, marveling at how her hearing seemed sharper than a dog's. Daisy walked in holding Fia, and the Duke said to her, Let's go to the island together tomorrow. The island? And it has to be tomorrow? The next morning, Daisy stared at the mountain of things piled on her bed, at a total loss for what to do. Fia knocked on her door. What are you doing, Daisy? I'm packing. There's still so much to bring, but I'm running out of space. Fia rummaged through the pile, confused. Isn't all of this mine? I'm worried it'll be inconvenient without all of it, so I figured we should just bring everything. Even if we don't end up using it, we can always bring it back. It's not every day we get to travel, so it's better to be over-prepared, Fia said, excited. Oh, I see. Then added reluctantly, Never mind me, Daisy. I don't think I'll go after all. Daisy startled. What are you talking about? If you don't go, then who's going? This time it's just you and Papa. Wait, what do you mean by that? Just me and the Duke alone? But if you don't go, then I can't go either. Hearing that, Fia looked stunned. Why can't I go? Of course I can't. Adults don't usually go traveling alone together, just the two of them. Is that really how it works? Fia rubbed her head, troubled. Daisy sighed. I really wanted to see the island. Fia, seeing how disappointed she looked, took her hand. Okay, I understand. I'll come too. Really? That's wonderful, Fialota. Let's go have a great time together. And there was one last thing that absolutely had to come along. She glanced over at the gift she still hadn't given away yet. A grand sailing ship cut across the water, and Fia excitedly pointed up at the sky for Daisy to see. Ooh, look over there, Daisy, and a bird. That's called a seagull, Fialota. And be careful, the railing here is dangerous. A seagull? Oh, I know, seagulls. What do they eat? Seagulls eat fish. I want to feed them fish. We have plenty at home. We eat it all the time at dinner. Daisy watched her, puzzled, thinking that she seemed so happy now. So why had she been so reluctant to come earlier? Just then, retching sounds came from behind them. Daisy turned to find Shadi looking utterly wrecked. Concerned, she asked, "Are you all right?" Shadi answered gamely, "I'm fine. It'll stop once we're off the boat. Ugh. That's exactly why I told you to just stay home instead of tagging along." "I'd have been heartbroken, Your Grace. Of course I had to come too." Just then, Fia cheered her fellow teammate on. "Go, Shadi, you've got this!" She patted Shadi's head as she spoke. Daisy watched the scene, thoroughly amused, thinking the two of them made an oddly perfect pair. A servant reported that the Duke would be arriving shortly. They'd spotted the docks and it was time to disembark. Daisy, looking out at the land ahead, thought curiously that she'd heard it wasn't far, but she hadn't expected to arrive so quickly. "Welcome, Your Grace. Do you have full-time staff on the island as well, so you can visit anytime you like? Just how much wealth does the Duke actually have?" A servant, seeing Daisy about to disembark, stepped forward eagerly. "The gap between the dock and the ship is quite wide. Please hold on to me." Just as Daisy reached out, uncertain, the Duke swiftly stepped in and caught her hand first. "Watch your step." He shot the servant a slightly irritated glance while doing so, and Daisy, blushing, followed him off the ship. After resting briefly at the villa, Fia came bounding over to drag Daisy off to the beach, pulling her along impatiently. Charmed by how adorable she was, Daisy said, all right, I know. Let's go change first, though." Once they'd changed clothes, Daisy and Fia arrived at the beach, and the scenery took her breath away. "I never would have guessed there was a place this beautiful nearby." Fia splashed straight into the water and turned back to call out, "Daisy, come on in already." Fia, today, wasn't chestnut at all. She looked exactly like a little tomato someone had accidentally dropped in the water. Fia kept calling for the Duke to join them, but he sat in his chair, clearly preoccupied, the mood strangely tense. "Papa, maybe you should rest for a bit first." Just as Daisy turned around, a starfish landed square on her face, and she shrieked. "Hey, look at Daisy!" Fia happily splashed water at her. "Don't do that, Fialotta!" The Duke draped a towel over Daisy's shoulders. "That's enough teasing, Fialotta. You scared her." Watching how attentively the Duke looked after Daisy, Shadi wore a knowing expression and walked over to whisper something to Fia. The two of them looked utterly baffled at first, unsure what he was up to, then exchanged a glance toward Daisy and the Duke, wearing matching expressions of quiet confidence. Shadi scooped up water with a leaf and started toward Daisy. The Duke stepped in to stop him, only to get soaked himself. Fia was thrilled at the spectacle. Just as the Duke was about to lose his temper, Daisy asked timidly, "Are you okay? Here, dry off with this." The Duke pulled off his shirt, revealing a solidly muscled physique. You'd never guess it from how he normally dressed. His figure was even better than she'd imagined. Bare-chested, he suddenly reached out toward Daisy, startling her. "Daisy, towel." Fia and Shadi exchanged an excited glance. Plan successful. But just as the two of them were dancing with delight, the Duke spoke up. "Shadi, your pay's getting cut for a month." Shadi, previously buzzing with excitement, deflated instantly like a popped balloon. Fia kept patting his head anyway. "Great job, Shadi. But what does a pay cut mean? Is it something that makes you so happy you cry?" Full and satisfied, Daisy and Fia patted their round bellies. "I'm so full. That was so delicious, wasn't it? Especially the seafood." Just then, Daisy looked out toward the sea, where the sun was about to set, the golden sky and blue water forming a striking contrast. "It's been so long since I've watched a sunset like this. It's beautiful." She'd been putting off giving out her gifts, waiting for the right moment, and decided now was as natural a time as any. She gently nudged Fia. "Daisy, what is it?" "This is for you. I think you'll like it." Fia took the gift, surprised. "What is this? Is it for me?" "Yes, it's for you. Nothing fancy, just a little something to mark my first paycheck." "I'm so happy, like I made this myself just for her." Daisy turned to find both the Duke and Shadi staring right at her and flustered. She quickly pulled out Shadi's gift instead. "This one's for you, Shadi." Shadi was thrilled too. "I never expected to get a gift too. Can I open it now?" Fia and Shadi tore open their gifts excitedly. "Pumpkins! Wah, pumpkins! Daisy, pumpkins! Pumpkin, 1, 2, there are 5 pumpkins!" Fia immediately put hers on. "I love it so much, Daisy. Does it look good? Thank you so much, really, Daisy." Shadi was equally delighted with his gift. "Thank you, I really love it. And it's perfect timing too, since I always spend forever trying to find my things." Just then, Daisy felt a heavy, brooding gaze fixed on her. She glanced over furtively toward the Duke. He was sipping his coffee, his eyes locked unmistakably on her. Holding his gift, she found herself in a full-blown internal war. Just like with Chestnut and Shoddy, she should just be natural about it, just hand it over. But somehow she couldn't muster the courage. What if she couldn't control her expression? What if he didn't like it? What if he opened it and looked disappointed? Just then, Fia noticed Daisy's awkward hesitation and quickly turned to Shoddy. The sun's setting. Shoddy didn't get her meaning at first, so Fia repeated it slowly, drawing out the words and winked at him. Shoddy caught on immediately and pulled Fia off toward the door. Daisy asked, confused, "Where are you two going? The sun's setting. We're going for a walk. Daisy, don't follow us." The Duke offered, "Then let's all go together." But before he could finish, Fia cut him off. "No, Papa can't come either. We already agreed, just the two of us, that we'd go for a walk together when the sun set." "Yep, just us two. We're heading out first." Daisy thought to herself that going for a walk at night made no sense. It would be dark soon and dangerous, and she was about to get up and chase after them. But she noticed the Duke was still staring at her intently. If eyes could talk, his were clearly saying, "So where's my gift?" Daisy said, awkward, "Ha ha, they really left, huh?" She'd thought she should have given it to him earlier when everyone was still around. Now, with just the two of them left, it felt almost like it carried some special meaning. "Fine. Don't look at him. Just hand it over already." Just as Daisy finally worked up the courage to pull out the gift, the Duke accidentally choked and coughed twice, and her carefully built-up resolve crumbled in an instant, the moment slipping away again. The two of them sat there in silence, Daisy thoroughly uncomfortable, even more so than the very first time they'd met. As the sky slowly darkened, Daisy wondered if she'd even managed to give the gift at all today. The Duke suddenly took Daisy's hand and said softly, "Daisy?" She blushed faintly. "Didane, what is it?" He gestured for her to look behind them. Once the sky had fully darkened, the forest was scattered with points of glimmering light, breathtakingly beautiful. The two of them walked slowly toward it, only to discover the shimmering lights were actually fireflies. Seeing fireflies for the first time, Daisy was thrilled, shaking the Duke's arm excitedly. "Wow, look over there, Duke! It landed right there!" Seeing her so happy made the Duke happy too. I'm glad you like it." Daisy looked at him, her heart racing without her even realizing it. "Today feels like a gift in itself," she thought. "Have I ever felt this moved, this full of gratitude in my whole life? I don't want to forget this moment, this memory. Your Grace, I really had a wonderful time today. Thank you so much for bringing me here." As she spoke, she pulled out the gift she still hadn't managed to give him. The Duke looked at the small box in confusion. "This is..." Daisy explained nervously. "It's nothing special, just a small gift. You probably already have something like it. Actually, you definitely do, so you probably don't even need it. And here I thought I wasn't getting a gift at all." The Duke opened the box and pulled out the fountain pen inside. "It's the same color as your eyes. I thought it would suit you." Daisy watched the Duke's silence anxiously. Why wasn't he saying anything at all? Did he really not like it? But then the Duke broke into a delighted smile. "Thank you. I really love it. I'll treasure it." Daisy's heart, which had been in her throat, finally settled. "I'm so glad you like it. Next time, I'll get you something even better." Their eyes met, unconsciously locking together. And Daisy, catching herself, turned away shyly, still feeling that his gaze had been a little too intense for comfort. Looking at the beautiful scene before them, Daisy said, "All the fireflies are glowing. It's so bright and beautiful. Isn't it really lovely?" But the Duke's gaze was fixed entirely on Daisy. "Yes, very lovely." He said it while quickly turning to face forward again, and the two of them stood there, both blushing, the air between them growing steadily more charged. Daisy felt a faint tingling warmth she couldn't place, until she suddenly realized the sensation was coming from her lips. A firefly had landed right on her face, and soon a whole swarm of them were buzzing around her, circling in loops. The Duke said, embarrassed, "I really don't understand why so many bugs are drawn to this spot, especially since we're right by the sea." The two of them hurried back toward the house, waving the insects away as they went. The next day, Daisy, already packed and ready to go, finally caught up with Fia, only to be startled by the sight of her. Both she and Shoddy had faces covered in red bumps, swollen almost beyond recognition. "What happened to you two? Where did you even go for that walk last night? Fia scratched her head and explained, there were just so many mosquitoes in the room. You both need to put some ointment on that. Daisy went to dig through her luggage but couldn't find any anywhere. Because Shadi, taking advantage of the moment when Daisy wasn't looking, had secretly stashed the fireflies they'd caught that night into her suitcase, and the two of them had shared a quiet, satisfied high five over it. Back at the estate, Fia excitedly called Daisy into her room and pulled out a stack of papers. Starting now, let me show you around. This first one is from the very first time you and I met. Daisy looked at Fia's drawings, thoroughly delighted. Oh wow, did you draw this for me? Fia pulled out another drawing. This second one is me and a pumpkin, because you love pumpkins just as much as I do, so this one's got both of your favorite things in it. That's exactly right. There were drawings of the two of them playing at the beach together, of catching fireflies with Shadi, and all sorts of other little moments Fia had captured just for Daisy. Looking through them, Daisy felt tears welling up, unable to hold them back. Fia held up a drawing showing all four of their faces together. Daisy and I have known each other for 30 days now. This is my gift to celebrate. Thank you, Fialotta. Daisy pulled her into a tight hug, quietly wiping away her own tears. Thank you so much. From that day on, whenever Daisy had a spare moment, she'd pull out the drawings Chestnut had given her and relive their memories on the island. One day, Fia suddenly came to find Daisy, inviting her to come read together, tugging her hand and rushing them toward her room. Daisy wondered, confused, why reading a book required such urgency. But the moment they walked in, there was the Duke, sitting in Fia's chair, while Fia herself immediately grabbed a book and settled down to read off to the side. Daisy and the Duke exchanged a blank look. Had they been set up again? While Fia sat there spinning in circles as she pretended to read, Shadi suddenly knocked and burst in. There's something very urgent that needs your attention, and here you are. He held out a letter from the palace. So this is the urgent matter you mentioned. Looking at this, that date is coming up fast. Time really does fly. Fia asked, her face lighting up with anticipation. Papa, it's the dance, right? You're definitely going this time too? The Duke sighed, resigned. I suppose I should? A dance? Daisy asked, curious, having no idea what they were talking about. Shadi grinned. Will you be attending on your own again this year, Your Grace? You'll get flooded with marriage proposals again, won't you? Marriage proposals? What did that even mean? Hearing this, Daisy's heart started racing without her meaning to. The idea of the Duke attending a ball and getting swarmed with proposals made her chest tighten uncomfortably. What was this feeling? Shadi rubbed his nose and said pointedly, It'd be nice if someone could accompany you this year. It's not like I can put on a gown and go with you. The Duke shuddered at the mental image of Shadi in a ball gown. Daisy finally couldn't hold back her curiosity and asked Shadi what exactly was going on. He explained, It's the palace's annual social gala, the largest ball in the entire empire. Barring extraordinary circumstances, the entire royal family attends without exception. Daisy's excitement spiked immediately. This was the perfect opportunity to meet more of the male leads. Like the second prince, Edward Chester, who happened to be the same age as Fia, a character Daisy herself had poured every ounce of creativity into. A stubbornly devoted man with waist-length hair and emerald green eyes, and at the same time, a tyrant capable of destroying an entire family with a mere flick of his finger. Shadi added that this ball also happened to be the only social event the head of the Mage Tower ever attended. Hearing this, Daisy startled again, and the Duke, seeming to recall something, turned and asked Daisy to step out and talk with him privately. Walking through the garden, the Duke said, I remember you telling me the second prince and the next head of the Mage Tower are important male leads, and the character you personally created turned out to be a prince, and a devoted tyrant no less. Daisy, embarrassed, forced out an explanation, that it was actually better this way, since she remembered every detail of the male leads she'd personally written with such care. The second prince will eventually and smoothly ascend to crown prince, even though the first prince, Clay Brantor, is a full 15 years older than him. He has absolutely no interest in the throne, since the second prince is, well, the male lead. Of course, that's how it has to go, right? Then Daisy remembered the marriage proposal comment from Shadi and asked nervously, Your Grace, I'm curious about something. Those marriage proposal letters, what exactly does that mean? And there are so many of them? The moment the words left her mouth, she saw the Duke flinch visibly and instantly regretted asking. He said awkwardly, It concerns Fialata. That's why I was paying attention to it. It might mean, well, becoming family, eventually. Hearing the word family, the Duke snapped his gaze toward Daisy, then flushed again. He exhaled. It's nothing important. It's a royal invitation after all. So even if it's a hassle, I still have to attend. Plenty of nobles bring along children who are making their society debuts, so every year there are new faces to see. So this ball really was a gathering of nobility from across the entire nation. Quite the star-studded affair. And among all those stars, the brightest one had to be the man standing right in front of her, especially since the Duke was famously reluctant to attend social functions of any kind. For distant nobles and their daughters, this was likely their one chance all year to even meet him. No wonder they came flocking from every corner of the country hoping to discuss marriage. Right, that's just how these things go. Completely natural. So why does it bother me so much? Why do I keep sighing without meaning to? I should really change the subject. She asked the Duke, So, will there be a need for attendance at the ball? He looked puzzled. What kind of attendance? What are you getting at? It's just, I really want to see Prince Edward in person. Haha. Though I doubt they'd let just anyone serve as an attendant at a royal ball. Never mind, it's probably not possible anyway. I should get going. And she hurried off. That evening, as the Duke prepared to write his reply to the palace, Shadi was surprised he was responding so early, thinking to himself. Normally, the Duke agonized over this decision until the very last possible moment, needing repeated nudges before he'd finally reply once he truly couldn't put it off any longer. Shadi kept craning his neck to peek at what the Duke was writing, practically leaning all the way across the desk. Finally losing his patience, the Duke slammed his hand on the table. Shadi, out. Fia saw Shadi step out and came bounding over eagerly to find out what was happening, asking excitedly whether her father would be going and whether he'd take Daisy with him. Shadi quickly held up a finger to his lips, signaling her to keep quiet, reminding her they were still in the middle of an operation. He sighed to himself, thinking that the Duke approached everything with such caution. He'd never expected him to be even more cautious about sorting out his own feelings. Just then, Fia thumped her chest confidently. Don't worry, you've still got me. The next day, the Duke left early on official business, and Fia grumbled at Shadi for not waking her sooner. Shadi explained that the Duke had stopped by her room before leaving and even kissed her on the forehead. Hadn't she noticed? Fia said, annoyed. I was asleep, of course I didn't notice. Shadi, all you ever do is tease me. Daisy hurried over to pat Fia's head and soothe her. Our Fialata is such a good girl. No fussing even with Papa away. So mature. Fia looked up at Daisy with wide, innocent eyes and said, Daisy, it's because I'm here keeping you company that you're not lonely, right? Because Daisy would feel lonely when Papa's away. The whole room froze at her words and Daisy's face flushed bright red instantly. What? How could that possibly... With the Duke gone, why on earth would I feel lonely? Daisy had been noticing lately that something felt off about Shadi and Fia. Those two scheming little troublemakers. She was determined to uncover the truth. All day she secretly kept an eye on Shadi, and eventually saw him glance around cautiously before knocking on Fia's door. What took you so long, Shadi? We're running out of time. Hurry, get in here. Overhearing this delighted Daisy. Clearly they were plotting something in secret. She crept up to the door and threw it open, hoping to catch them red-handed, only to find them poring seriously over some sketches. It turned out that Rodizan was coming to visit that day. Fia had written to her earlier, and she'd replied quickly. Fia had been rushing to finish a drawing to give her when she arrived. Daisy suddenly understood. Oh, you're just drawing, Shadi explained. The young lady said she couldn't find you anywhere, so she asked me to help her with the paper instead. Daisy felt an instant wave of embarrassment. She'd been so busy spying that she'd completely neglected her actual duties. Mortified, blaming herself for suspecting them of scheming, she immediately offered to help Fia with her drawing instead. Fia and Shadi exchanged a sly grin, complete with little imaginary devil horns and wings. That afternoon, Rodizan arrived right on schedule, and Fia excitedly rushed down to embrace her. Watching the two of them so close, Daisy thought to herself that maybe she'd just been overthinking things. even if this girl was destined to become a scheming secret heroine someday. Right now, she was still just a child. Whatever plans she might have were probably nothing more than a kid's playful mischief, and Shadi was just humoring Fialota anyway, since he genuinely adored Chestnut too. In the room, Fia was busy drawing a picture of herself and Rodizan, and Daisy, watching them get along so well, felt reassured. "You two keep playing. I'll go get you something to eat." With that, Daisy stood and left the room. Once she was gone, Rodizan asked Fia quietly, "Is she going to be your mother eventually?" Fia said, pleased with herself. "That's right." She held up her fingers to count. "Maybe in about 30 more nights." Then she turned to Rodizan. "You like Daisy a lot too, don't you?" Rodizan nodded eagerly, then added wistfully, "I wish my mother could be that wonderful too." Fia thought for a moment, then gently patted Rodizan as if trying to comfort her. Rodizan hugged her. "But if Fialota's mother turns out to be that nice, I'll be happy for you too, because we're friends." Fia suddenly thought of something and turned to Rodizan. "Do you want to touch my hair?" "Why would I touch your hair?" "It's a ceremony if it's very important." Once Rodizan agreed, Fia immediately leaned forward, urging her to hurry up and touch it. Rodizan stroked Fia's fluffy hair, completely melting at the softness of it. The next day, Fia woke up and went straight to the Duke's office, throwing herself into his arms the moment she saw him. "I missed you so much, Papa. I even hosted our guests. Didn't you say that's what I'm supposed to do while you're away? Ha 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 ha, my daughter really is so clever." Daisy chased after Fia, arriving at the door out of breath, just as the Duke returned. She noticed he was using the very same pen she'd given him sitting on his desk, and her heart warmed. So he really had been using it this whole time. Seeing Daisy arrive, the Duke spoke first. "You must be tired." Daisy answered, blushing. "Not at all. The two of them had a wonderful time together." Just then, Shadi cleared his throat and stepped forward. "While you were away from the estate, Your Grace, a reply arrived from the palace." Daisy startled. "Is that the reply about the ball?" The Duke received the royal reply, and Fia asked curiously what guest of honor meant. Shadi explained that a guest of honor was an especially distinguished visitor. Then the two of them turned to look at Daisy, eyes sparkling in unison, leaving her thoroughly bewildered by their identical mischievous gleam. The Duke shooed the two troublemakers away, then called Daisy over. "You'll be coming with me. This is an opportunity we simply can't pass up." Daisy said, uneasy, "Are you talking about the royal ball? But I'm just a commoner with no proper status at all." "That's already been handled. You're now officially part of the heady Viscount family. Even attending a ball surrounded by other nobles, there won't be any issue at all. I thought it would be better for you to have a proper title rather than just being a commoner. It'll make things easier going forward, whenever we need to go out together again." Daisy, still not quite processing it all, said, "Oh, if that's the reason." But the Duke rose and walked toward her. "Let me put it more plainly. I want you to come to the ball with me. Let me ask you properly one more time. Koch, will you come with me?" He extended his hand toward her. Daisy nodded shyly and took it. The Duke smiled. "Then let's silence every single one of those wagging tongues." From then on, Daisy threw herself into busy preparations for the ball. And before long, the day arrived. Before they left, Fia asked with concern whether Daisy was ready. Daisy patted her head. "Yes, everything's ready. Don't worry. While Papa and I are away, be a good girl and stay with Shadi, no misbehaving." Fia turned her head away, putting on her best haughty expression. "I would never. I just turned 7. I'm not going to be difficult anymore." After saying goodbye to Fia and Shadi, Daisy and the Duke set out together, both dressed in their finest, radiating elegance and grandeur. Daisy marveled at the fact that she was actually attending a royal ball as a Viscount's daughter, and she'd get to see with her own eyes the male lead she'd created herself. There was no way she could miss this chance. She suddenly turned to the Duke. "Since you've been to so many of these balls already, have you ever met the second prince?" "Prince Edward. I've probably seen him once or twice. He's still just a child, so I don't cross paths with him often." Daisy clasped her hands together nervously. She'd get to see him at the ball. She really couldn't believe this day had finally come. "My male lead is going to be the future Prince Edward. His hair neatly braided, his whole bearing perfectly matched by those emerald green eyes and chestnut brown hair. Kind and cheerful. Though, of course, that's just what he looks like on the surface." Right as she finished, she noticed the Duke glaring at her, visibly displeased, and wondered if she'd said too much. She quickly explained, "It's just, I put so much thought into writing that character." The Duke thought for a moment. "Just from what you're describing, it sounds a lot more like Prince Clay, the older brother, 15 years senior to Prince Edward." "Oh, really? Does the first prince have emerald eyes too, and chestnut brown hair as well?" Seeing the Duke nod in confirmation, Daisy excitedly clapped a hand over her mouth. "And here I thought I'd have to wait another 15 years to meet a male lead who perfectly matched my type. There's already someone who looks exactly like him. How exciting, my ideal man." Watching Daisy get completely swept up in her own excitement, the Duke felt a flicker of unease, huffed in annoyance, and turned to look out the window. Soon the three of them walked arm in arm into the palace. The Duke noticed Daisy's stiff, nervous movements and gently patted her hand. "You don't need to worry about anything. I promise you'll have a wonderful time." Just as she was touched by his reassurance, a crowd of people suddenly swarmed toward the Duke. "Your Grace, it's been far too long." The noble ladies eyed Daisy discreetly, trying to figure out just who she was, that she'd be allowed to accompany the Duke to the ball. Daisy thought to herself that the moment she'd been dreading had finally arrived, and figured she'd simply follow the etiquette she'd learned, bowing gracefully to the crowd. "This is Lady Hetty." "The Hetty family? I've never even heard of them." As everyone exchanged puzzled looks, the Duke explained, "As a distinguished family from Wutana, the Hettys have had ties with the Hunston family for a very long time." "Wutana? Isn't that where Diane went not long ago?" So that's why he'd traveled there. Daisy looked at his face, deeply moved. The ball proceeded as planned, and before long it was time for Daisy's final trial of the evening, the dance. The Duke extended his hand to her. "Would you care to dance with me? If I step on your foot, please forgive me. I've never danced like this in either of my lives." The Duke drew her close by the waist. "So this dance with me, is this your very first dance?" Daisy lost her balance and stumbled straight into his chest, feeling his arm around her waist, his breath against her forehead, her heart pounding uncontrollably. It really was her first time dancing. With that, the Duke swept her into motion. The noble ladies around them watched the Duke dance with love-struck expressions. "I can't believe we're actually seeing Duke Hunston dance. My goodness, how elegant." Meanwhile, Daisy had just stepped squarely on the Duke's foot. She scolded herself internally. "Idiot, don't mess up again." But all she could manage was apologizing, over and over. As the sky darkened, Daisy finally managed to escape the mortifying dance floor, feeling like she'd truly come back to life. Still, leaving the Duke behind, surrounded by all those noble ladies, while she slipped away on her own, made her feel a little guilty. Though surely he'd built up enough tolerance by now, he'd probably be fine. Just then, she heard the sound of crying nearby and spotted a small child crouched on the ground, sobbing. "Hey there, little one, did you come with your mother? Are you lost?" The moment the child heard her, he flinched and glared up at her. "How dare you? I'm just resting here. Leave at once." Daisy studied his chestnut brown hair and green eyes, wondering, could he possibly be? Before she could ask, a voice called out from the distance. "Your Highness, where are you?" Daisy watched the little boy, eyes practically sparkling. This really was the second Prince Edward. Was he actually the male lead she'd written? Just then, a young man's voice came from behind her. "Edward, so this is where you've been hiding. You've really given the servants a hard time." The boy lit up and called out cheerfully, "Brother!" Daisy turned around thinking, so this must be the first prince. Looking at the man before her, she was stunned. He really was the spitting image of her male lead. Chestnut brown hair pulled into a ponytail, matching perfectly groomed eyebrows. Forcing herself into a composed, elegant stance, she was internally screaming with excitement. "Your Highness, I am Daisy Hetty." To Daisy's surprise, the prince already knew who she was. "So you're Hetty, I've really wanted to meet you. I suppose I should properly introduce myself too, though I do have a rather long name, you can just call me Clay. I'm not a huge fan of all these elaborate formalities." There's actually something I wanted to ask you. After paying respects to His Majesty, everyone heads to the dance floor. Did you and Duke Hunston dance together? Him bringing a companion to the ball was already shocking enough, but dancing too. That's the biggest news of the whole evening. And I missed the whole thing, so I already went and begged the palace painter earlier. If you two dance later, he absolutely has to capture it and keep it forever. So, tell me, did you two dance? Daisy thought that if her disastrous dancing ever got immortalized in a painting, that would be nothing short of public humiliation. Your Highness, Dane would be very embarrassed. I'm sorry, but I have to decline your request. The first prince burst out laughing at how seriously she'd delivered that. You don't need to talk to me so formally. That's genuinely funny. I'm not giving you any orders here. Actually, can I just call you Daisy? Growing dizzy listening to the first prince ramble on and worried she might slip up and do something wrong, Daisy said, I'm truly sorry. I've been away for far too long. I should head back now. Then let me ask you something else later. Actually, I'm quite curious about Duke Hunston. Before he could finish, Daisy cut him off. That's something you should really ask him yourself. Just then, the Duke walked over slowly. The first prince said happily, It's been so long since I've seen you. I almost forgot what you looked like, since you only ever visit to see His Majesty. The Duke greeted both princes properly, then turned to Daisy. I got a little worried, so I came to find you. Then, turning back to the first prince, he said, I'll come pay my respects to you shortly. Please excuse us for now, Your Highness. He moved to leave, but the first prince stopped them. Wait, didn't you just tell me to ask him myself? You have to answer my question first before you go. The Duke and Daisy exchanged a resigned look. I heard you mobilized the knights and cleared out every illegal guild in Pontypool, and that you didn't just direct the operation from a distance. You personally went undercover and rescued a beautiful woman. Is that true? Once the Duke confirmed it, the first prince grew even more intrigued. The more I learn about you, the more surprised I am. You must have gone in disguise. Could that beautiful woman have been Daisy by any chance? Daisy and the Duke both looked at the visibly thrilled first prince, utterly at a loss for what game he was playing. I'll fill you in another time. This really isn't something we should discuss in front of a lady, and honestly, considering the dignity of the royal family, don't you think your tone could use a little polishing? Daisy watched both princes looking rather pitiful and started to wonder if she was hallucinating. Just then, servants came looking for them. Apparently, the emperor wanted to see the princes. The first prince turned to say goodbye, sneaking a wink at Daisy, who blushed instantly at the gesture. He waved Daisy along. Duke? Not Dane. The Duke, seeing how flustered she was, burst out laughing. You really are all over the place, aren't you? If you're not used to it, you can just call me Duke instead. No, I like this one. Let's go. Fialota must be waiting anxiously by now. It was already quite late by the time they returned to the estate, and yet Fia still hadn't gone to sleep. Shadi explained she'd been drifting in and out of half-sleep all evening, waiting for them to come home. Fia stretched. See, this is exactly why you should always sleep properly in your own bed. The two of them tucked her back into bed and slipped quietly out of the room. After saying their goodnights, the Duke lingered, watching Daisy's retreating figure in silence. For him, a ball that made him this nervous was an entirely new experience. And it was only because Daisy had been there with him this time. The next morning at breakfast, the Duke walked out dressed with unusual formality, startling Shadi into checking whether there was some scheduled event he'd forgotten about. Daisy, too, wondered what the occasion was. His outfit was different from usual, and he'd even put on new cufflinks, though his face looked oddly tired. There's no schedule at all today. Who says you can only dress like this when you're going out? The Duke said, clenching his fist, wondering how he could possibly bring up the idea of a date naturally. As it turned out, he'd stayed up the entire night agonizing over it. Just as the Duke was at a loss for what to do, Fia suggested that after lessons they could go plant flowers in the garden together. Quite the loyal little wingman. That evening, thinking about how the Duke had spontaneously proposed a date with her that day, Daisy blushed and put together a list of places she wanted to visit. The Duke looked over the thick stack of notes in his hands, sweat beading on his forehead, then let out a short laugh and decided to take her to every single place on the list. The Duke took Daisy to a cafe, where she personally made a mocha topped with cream. She took a sip and found it delicious, then handed the cup over to him. Do you want to try it? I haven't touched this part. He reached for the cup and gently wiped the foam from her lips, murmuring as he sipped, Just like Fialota, always keeping me on my toes. Daisy blushed and started to apologize, but her foot slipped, sending her stumbling backward. The Duke caught her instantly. Blushing, he turned aside. Let's go to the next place. Then he naturally took her hand. No matter how careful you say you'll be, you're always going to trip over something, just like Fialotta. Daisy looked at him and thought, is it really okay for me to be like this with the heroine's father? Next, the Duke took Daisy to the lake, and seeing how excited she was, he decided he'd do whatever she wanted. Naturally, she wanted to go rowing. Watching the Duke, sweating profusely from his utter lack of rowing skill, Daisy asked awkward, are you sure you're all right? Maybe I should take over. But he stubbornly refused. Daisy thought, well, now I know exactly where Fialotta gets her stubbornness from. Once they reached the shore, the Duke sat down to rest on a chair, and Daisy stood in front of him, spreading her arms wide to shield him from the sun. Blushing slightly, he grabbed her arm and looked at her seriously. There's something I want to ask you. The chestnut brown hair and green eyes you poured so much feeling into while writing the book. Is that your type? Daisy thought of how, if the second prince really did become a tyrant one day, it would surely spell trouble for Chestnut. Is there really no way around this? The Duke, noticing she'd drifted off, interrupted her thoughts. Is my question making things difficult for you? Daisy said, flustered. No, sorry. What did you just say? Sorry. Only to see the Duke's expression darken even further. I'm asking whether you have any other types besides that one. Daisy tilted her head, wondering if he meant her tastes as a writer. She'd already told him everything there was to say about that. Strictly speaking, the future tyrant was just a character she personally happened to enjoy writing. When it came to real men, she actually preferred someone gentle and warm. Well, if she had to be honest, the man standing right in front of her right now, at the thought, her face grew uncomfortably hot. Back at the estate, Shadi was fretting over the Duke, silently praying he wouldn't botch things up completely, that he wouldn't say anything painfully awkward or clueless. Shadi, stop pacing, you're making me dizzy. Fia was knitting something with Rodizan and handed Shadi a glass of milk. Here, stop that and drink this. I heard this is what you drink when you're worried. Rodizan asked curiously what the trouble was. Well, my papa went out with Daisy today, and that's why Shadi's acting like this. Rodizan said matter-of-factly, I see. So now Fialotta has a mother. Shadi, mid-sip, spat his milk everywhere in shock. Fia said seriously, well, not yet, but it should happen soon enough. Shadi, sweating, turned to her. Don't worry, Shadi. Rodizan's on our side too, since she's my very best friend. Rodizan asked, curious. But why are you sighing and worrying about it? Isn't this a good thing? I'm just worried whether the Duke's doing a good job. Rodizan's eyes lit up with wonder. Why does he need to do a good job? As long as I'm with Fialotta, I'm happy. Because Shadi simply couldn't grasp it, that no matter what you did, being together was enough to be happy. Shadi, thoroughly schooled, admitted he'd learned something today. Rodizan asked Fia, are you going to the festival in a couple of days? The one with the paper lanterns that light up and float into the sky? Oh, that one. I've been so many times, it's kind of lost its charm for me by now. Hearing about the festival, Shadi suddenly perked up with interest. Just you wait, this year's going to be different. After a full day out, Daisy and the Duke returned to the estate, and Daisy energetically swept Fia up into a hug, while the Duke trudged in looking utterly worn out. Shadi told Daisy that Pontypridd held an annual festival in the city, a sky lantern celebration. Daisy said, her face lighting up with anticipation. I've heard about that festival, and I'd love to go once. The Duke, ears perking up at the mention that Daisy wanted to go, immediately stepped forward. Then let's go together. Daisy spun Fia around excitedly. Shadi, quite pleased with his own scheming, thought to himself that now it was time to get everything ready. Shadi went ahead of time to scout out locations for the Lantern Festival. One spot right at the center of the beach, perfect for watching the lanterns rise into the sky. Another along the coastline, where you could watch the starlight scattering down beyond the cliffs. An equally breathtaking view. If they set up seating in both spots, that would mean the four of them would have to split into two groups. Actually, wait, there was no need for all four of them to sit together anyway. If instead just the two of them ended up seated alone together, both spots would need careful decorating regardless, so why not just seat the Duke and Daisy at the beachfront spot? Thinking this over, Shadi couldn't help but cover his mouth and grin. He really was a genius, wasn't he? Soon it was time for the lantern viewing, and once they arrived, Daisy and Fia happily ran off ahead. The Duke, getting out of the carriage afterward, asked the attendant where their seats were, and was told Shadi had said to meet at the fork in the path. Once there, the Duke saw two sets of seats prepared, one at the center of the beach, one along the coastline. He'd meant to pretend not to notice, but how could he possibly go through with that? There was the coastline seating all set up. Fine, no need to wait, let's just go there directly. Looking at the romantic seating along the coast, the Duke thought that sitting there would practically be a public declaration. Just as the sky darkened and the festival was about to begin, Shadi came rushing over out of breath. "Where have you been? You never showed up. I've been waiting forever." The Duke said awkwardly, "Isn't this the spot?" "No, it's the one at the center of the beach." Shadi grabbed the Duke's arm to pull him along. "Come on, hurry, follow me." But by the time they stood up, the beach was already packed with people, and amid a wave of gasps and cheers, countless lanterns rose into the sky all at once. The Duke and Shadi froze on the spot. Shadi's whole plan had gone up in smoke. The two of them reluctantly sat back down in their original seats, two grown men sitting together in what was supposed to be a romantic setup, both thoroughly uncomfortable. A few tourists noticed the elegantly decorated seats and wandered over to see who was being so romantic, only to find two gentlemen sitting there instead, letting out startled gasps before quickly excusing themselves and giving them space. Shadi asked, awkward, whether they should just lower the curtains. The Duke said, resigned, "Wouldn't that just make things even stranger?" "Next time," Shadi muttered, "just tell me directly." Meanwhile, Fia and Daisy watched the lanterns with excitement. "So beautiful, right, Daisy?" "Yes, it really is. This is the first time I've seen them this close." Fia gathered wildflowers into a little bouquet and placed it on Daisy, looking radiant under the glow of the lanterns. Daisy suddenly remembered the other two. "Aren't Shadi and Papa coming?" "It's fine. Shadi and Papa have already watched this with me so many times before, but this is Daisy's very first time, and you got to see it with me. Isn't that wonderful?" "That's right." Daisy hugged Fia happily. The next day, both Daisy and the Duke received the same letter, and Daisy realized, to her surprise, that it had come from the first prince. As they read it together, the room fell completely silent. Shadi asked curiously what it was about. "He's throwing a party, a horseback riding party." Daisy felt her heart race with excitement. She loved parties, and she'd always wanted to try horseback riding too. Getting both at once wasn't just exciting, it was genuinely thrilling. She said, "I'd love to go." But at the exact same moment, the Duke said, "That sounds boring." Realizing Daisy wanted to go, the Duke immediately panicked and backpedaled. "Let's go together. Now that I think about it, it's been a while since I've shown my face at this kind of event anyway. It might not be so bad." Shadi, sensing the Duke's awkwardness, quickly changed the subject. "But Daisy, can you even ride a horse?" Daisy scratched her cheek, embarrassed. "Well, actually, I'll teach you myself," the Duke said, flashing a confident smile. Soon the day of the riding party arrived, and Daisy took in the pristine beach and the exquisite pastries, thinking to herself that she could hardly believe she was attending a party hosted by a prince in the royal gardens. Transmigrating had truly paid off. Once there, the Duke gallantly helped Daisy off her horse, and the first prince came forward to greet them. "Thank you both for coming today." The two of them offered their greetings. "We're honored to be here, Your Highness." "I already told you, you don't need to bother with all that formality. Surely you haven't forgotten already." Seeing the first prince being so warm toward Daisy, even winking at her, the Duke frowned, visibly jealous, and stepped in between them, saying stiffly, "Thank you for having us today." But the first prince didn't seem to notice at all. "I should be the one thanking you two for coming. Word got out somehow that Duke Hunston would be attending my party, so we've had far more guests than usual show up today. I'm really looking forward to seeing how much fun this turns out to be. Aren't you, Daisy?" Daisy nodded awkwardly. Yes, of course." Once seated, the first prince mentioned to Daisy that Edward still remembered her name, though he'd apparently been quite annoyed, calling her "that lady who called me a kid." Daisy remembered the little boy. He really did seem like the type to hold a grudge. "I'm really sorry about that. It was a slip of the tongue on my part." "It's fine. Because of that, he actually seems to think you're rather approachable. So next time Edward's around, would you like to come play with him? He puts on a tough act, but he'd genuinely be happy if you came. He gets bored and lonely quite often. Consider this a personal invitation." But before he could finish, the Duke cut him off. "Your Highness Clay Brantor, my new estate in Barnes is nearly finished. If it's all right with you, I'd like to invite you to visit. And it would be even better if you could bring the second prince along as well, since staying cooped up in the palace all the time must get terribly dull. Daisy thought to herself, Barnes? Barnes? That's so far from both the palace and the Duke's estate. Why would he insist on somewhere like that? He must be trying to keep Prince Edward as far from Chestnut as possible. Dane really did think of everything. The first prince, suspecting nothing, agreed at once. How could I say no to an invitation from Duke Hunston himself? Daisy went on thinking that if she could meet the second prince again, she'd surely find more clues to protect against any future risk. She glanced around at the crowd. Every single guest was a strikingly handsome young man or beautiful young woman, all around the same age. So you're the one responsible for the young lady's education. No wonder you must be an exceptional teacher. Most etiquette and manners are best taught through everyday living together anyway. Yes, of course, Daisy replied out loud while privately thinking, all I've actually taught Chestnut is how to fold a pumpkin out of paper. Just as everyone was chatting away pleasantly, Daisy's stomach let out a soft growl. Ugh, was that from laughing too much? Why is nobody touching the refreshments? Am I the only one who's hungry? I can't be the one to reach for it first, not with everyone watching. Just then, the Duke noticed her predicament and reached over to place a few pastries on her plate. Everyone turned to look at the two of them, and Daisy sat frozen, too embarrassed to move. That was when the first prince broke the tension. Actually, I was starting to feel a bit talkative myself. My mouth's been itching for a while now. These are cakes and cookies the palace pastry chef started baking before dawn. Why is everyone just staring at them? The moment the prince spoke up, someone immediately chimed in. Oh, does that mean we might get to try that famous lemon tart today too? Of course, it's the very first thing they baked. I should go try it right away. Daisy finally got the pastries she'd been longing for. After eating, everyone gathered on the beach for the day's main activity. Riding on the grasslands is fun, but riding by the sea is pretty amazing too. I think I might actually have some natural talent for this. The Duke said, concerned, The waves are strong, be careful. Well, look who taught me. It's not difficult at all. Suddenly, a horse came charging over, jostling Daisy's white horse aside. A young lady rode up to greet the Duke. I believe this is actually the first time I've seen you outside a ball. The Duke's expression turned utterly cold. Horses standing this close together is dangerous. Could you please keep your distance? Oh, of course, I'll be going then. The noble lady flinched at the Duke's icy expression and quickly retreated. That was impressive. Are you all right? Her attempt to stake her claim was a little too obvious, wasn't it? Daisy hid her awkwardness behind a smile. It's only natural, I suppose, for the space beside a man who gets flooded with proposal letters every time he attends a ball. You really do seem to have something different about you, don't you? Just as Daisy was puzzling over that remark, a wave crashed in, spooking her horse into rearing up. She lost her grip and fell straight into the sea with a splash, thoroughly drenched and mortified. The noble lady from earlier immediately looked pleased at her misfortune. Just as Daisy wondered what to do, the first prince deliberately jumped into the water as well. Oh my, this is so refreshing, don't you think so too? Everyone panicked. Your Highness! Just as Daisy was trying to figure out how to get up gracefully, the Duke draped a towel over her. Are you all right? Are you hurt anywhere? Just bear with it a moment, I've already sent someone to bring you a change of clothes. Ignoring how soaked she was, the Duke scooped her up into his arms, turning to check on the first prince as he did. Are you all right, Your Highness? The first prince smiled faintly at him, and amid the astonished stares of the crowd, the Duke carried Daisy toward the house, while the prince watched the two of them from a distance. Once the gathering wrapped up, the Duke and Daisy said their goodbyes to the first prince. You're leaving already? Yes, thank you so much for today. No need to thank me, I'm the one who should thank you. Daisy was a little puzzled. All she'd really done today was fall into the water. The first prince smiled, looking genuinely delighted. Because you were willing to come at all. Just then, the Duke cleared his throat and said stiffly, Thank you for the invitation today, we'll be heading out now. But after walking a few steps, Daisy turned back to call out to the first prince. Please wait, Your Highness. Honestly, it was thanks to you that I was saved earlier. I'm truly sorry, and thank you. Thanks to me? I don't quite follow, weren't you the one who fell in the water on purpose? The first prince waved his hands frantically. On purpose? No, of course not. How could that be? I saw the whole thing, Prince Clay. You're a terrible liar. The first prince scratched his head, blushing. Ha 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 ha. That's just chivalry. Pure chivalry. Daisy and the Duke returned to the estate, and before they'd even made it inside, they heard Fia's distressed wailing. Fia-Lotta, what's wrong? What happened? There was Fia, her face covered in tears, sobbing that she'd lost it. Daisy hurried over to wipe her tears. Did it fall off while you were sleeping? Fia pulled out the hairpin Daisy had given her. It fell off, wah! Daisy and the Duke finally relaxed, sighing in relief. I was wearing it while I slept last night, and when I woke up, it was like this. That's exactly why Papa always tells you. The more precious something is, the more carefully you have to protect it. Fia clutched her head and sobbed harder. I didn't listen, I'm sorry. I'll help you get it fixed. At Daisy's words, Fia perked up instantly and looked at her. Just take it to the shop and have it fixed. Daisy's the best. Daisy went to the shop. I'd like to get this hairpin repaired. This will probably take 3 or 4 days to fix. I'll make sure it's sturdy so it won't fall off again. Once it's done, I'll have someone contact you so there's no need to worry. All right, thank you. Once outside, Daisy thought about how, since that beloved hairpin had broken, Chestnut would surely be even more upset once she found out it would take several days to repair. Maybe she should buy some pumpkin cookies to cheer her up, or perhaps some pumpkin-shaped orange gummies instead. Just as she was lost in thought, a hand landed on her shoulder, startling her half to death. Did I scare you? I'm terribly sorry. Wow, running into you in a place like this feels so fresh, so exciting. Oh, and are you feeling all right? I was worried you might catch a cold. Daisy stared, baffled, at the chattering man in front of her. Had she mistaken him for someone else? What was someone who should have been at the palace doing out here? Just as she came to her senses and started to bow properly, the first prince quickly stopped her. If any nobles who recognize me overhear that, it'll cause quite the stir. Seeing Daisy's utterly shocked expression, the first prince laughed happily. Come on, you're making a face like you've seen a ghost. I really never imagined I'd run into you here. Well, the feeling's mutual, I suppose. Where are you headed anyway? I was just out running an errand and now I'm heading back. So soon? Do you have other plans? Not really. The first prince's eyes suddenly lit up. Well then, since fate brought us together like this, why don't we get lunch together? The first prince was actually inviting Daisy to lunch, right there on the street. Daisy asked, awkward. You don't mean for me to come back to the palace with you, do you? The first prince, blushing, waved his hands. Daisy, what are you talking about? I finally managed to sneak out and you want me to go back? Coming out here again? Did the whole royal family have a talent for running away from home? Don't worry, even if someone spots us, I'll just say we ran into each other by chance. Daisy said quickly, It really was by chance. Then she hesitated. The first prince said, dejected, So I suppose I'll be eating lunch alone then? Then he turned to Daisy with a pitiful look. Come with me, just this once. Seeing how pathetic he looked, Daisy reluctantly agreed. And the first prince immediately brightened, eager to take her somewhere especially delicious. Before long, they arrived at the place the first prince had mentioned. He pointed ahead. Look over there. You've never been, have you, Daisy? Daisy frowned at the oddly familiar sight. Cherno's Western Restaurant? Wasn't this the very place she used to work? If she ran into someone who recognized her, it would spell disaster. If any of the staff there spotted her, her secret would surely come out sooner or later. Daisy pulled the first prince back the other way. But there's another place nearby that's really good too. Let me take you there instead. The two of them ended up at a tea house instead. I never would have guessed you'd enjoy a place like this. Honestly, I always assumed noble ladies wouldn't come wandering down this street. I've actually visited quite a few tea houses like this myself. Daisy said, embarrassed. Exploring good food is actually my hobby. A foodie? You mean you enjoy restaurants with great food? Haha, yes, exactly. Though this is actually a secret hobby I've never told anyone else about. The first prince smiled. Same here. I love good food too. Honestly, flavor isn't just about the food itself. The atmosphere matters just as much. But the atmosphere at home is always exactly the same, so I never get that feeling there. He picked up the menu. Come on, let's order something. Today's specials include a beef dish. How about that? Daisy thought to herself. He skipped right past the appetizers and went straight to the specials section. He probably really does come to places like this often. And then asked, "So, do you want the beef?" "Not particularly. Why? Isn't this the chef's top recommendation for the day?" Typical rookie mistake. In that case, I don't think that's actually the best choice. Not every restaurant does this. But some places recommend certain dishes just to clear out inventory quickly, which usually means the ingredients aren't the freshest. The first prince asked, curious, "How do you know so much about this stuff? I used to work at a restaurant." Daisy caught herself immediately and grabbed the menu instead. "The pork dish here is excellent. No gamey taste at all, wonderfully tender. Would you like to try it?" The first prince laughed brightly. How could I possibly say no? A series of exquisite dishes arrived at the table, and the first prince was thoroughly delighted after tasting them. "This is so much better than I expected." Daisy asked curiously, "So do you always use the fake name Clay whenever you go out like this?" The first prince glanced around cautiously, then leaned in close and whispered, "Isn't my full name Clay Branter? It's just part of my actual name." Daisy laughed behind her hand, only to realize the first prince was staring at her intently. Why the sudden change in expression? The first prince said seriously, "Daisy, there's something I'm quite curious about." "It's a rather personal question, but may I ask?" "Sure, go ahead." Daisy wondered what he could possibly want to know. "Are you and Duke Hunston especially close?" Daisy, mid-sip of tea, coughed violently. "What did you just say?" The first prince, unusually earnest, repeated the question. "Are you and Duke Hunston especially close?" "Because you two always attend gatherings together, and I had no idea you two even lived under the same roof until I found out at the tea party yesterday." Daisy explained, "No, it's not. Actually, I'm responsible for most of the young lady's education. Since daily life and manners are involved, it's simply more practical for us to live in the same house." The first prince asked, "So you're saying it's purely a working relationship?" "A working relationship?" Daisy flinched inwardly. "But not long ago, we went on something that felt very much like a date. And whenever I see Dane, my heart still races and my face still flushes. Still, no matter what, we're absolutely not that kind of relationship." The first prince watched Daisy, blushing and utterly tongue-tied, and finally laughed softly. "I'm sorry, I think I just asked you a question that put you in a rather difficult spot." The moment Daisy arrived back at the estate, Fia heard the sound of the door and came dashing over. "Daisy, why are you back so late? Can my hairpin be fixed? Can it be made exactly like it was before?" Daisy patted Fia's head. "The craftsman said it'll be fixed, don't worry." Fia finally relaxed, letting out a breath of relief. "Great! Oh, and Daisy, come here, I have something to show you." When Daisy opened the door, she found Dane and Shadi both looking troubled, tinkering with something. "You're back, a little late today." "Ah, is it already this late?" Daisy looked at the little house sitting in front of the two of them and asked what it was. "This is what Papa and Shadi and I made together while you were out. All it needs now is for this door to be attached and it'll be finished." Shadi stretched. "Since you were out so late, the young lady was convinced the hairpin couldn't be fixed after all, and she's been upset about it for ages. It turned out the two of them had built this to cheer Chestnut up." Daisy lowered her head and apologized to Fia. "I'm sorry, Fialota. I actually ran into someone, which is why I'm back so late." "Is that so? You've been busy too then. Who did you meet?" "I happened to run into Prince Clay in the city." The moment the Duke heard Prince Clay, his grip slipped, and a sharp crack rang out for everyone to hear. Fia slowly turned her head and saw the door, now snapped in two. "Papa, that was my door. It just needed to be attached and it would have been done." Then she burst into loud sobs, and watching how heartbroken she looked left Daisy deeply worried, while the Duke wore the expression of a man with far too much on his mind. That night, as Shadi watched the Duke out of the corner of his eye, he thought to himself that in all his years serving at the Duke's side, this was the first time he'd ever seen him look so tormented over unrequited feelings. He decided to speak up. The first prince really is something else. His idea of a good time is sneaking out of the palace to go people-watching on the street. The Duke said, subdued, "Yes, being able to dress up as a commoner and wander freely through the city without a care in the world, that's a genuinely interesting way to live." Shadi, apparently oblivious to the Duke's darkening expression, kept going. "I'm sure Daisy would appreciate someone with that kind of easy charm too. Compared to someone who never says a word and just stands there looking blank all the time, it's got to be a lot easier to be around." Noticing the Duke's grip on his pen tightening without him realizing it, Shadi decided to push a little further. It sounds like the two of them had a great time talking. Daisy said she laughed so hard her stomach hurt. I've never seen her that happy before. The Duke, unable to take it any longer, said coldly, Shadi. Startled, Shadi flinched, thinking to himself, it's precisely because you keep making the atmosphere this tense that you can never make any progress with her. Poor Daisy has to deal with so much. The Duke cleared his throat and asked, am I really that dense? Shadi thought, gotcha. It's less that you're dense and more that it's genuinely hard to read what you're thinking. That's exactly the problem. It's really hard to see what's going on in your head. If you like someone, say you like them. If you're happy, say you're happy. If something's cute, say it's cute. If something bothers you, say it bothers you. You have to actually show it, or the other person will never know what you're really feeling. The Duke, confused, asked, do these things really need to be spoken out loud to be understood? As someone who's served by your side for so long, as your friend of many years, I have to tell you this today. If things keep going the way they are, and Daisy ends up falling for Prince Clay instead, what exactly are you going to do about it? This marks the final chapter of Season 1. Since the manhwa artist hasn't drawn Season 2 yet, the story ends here for now. Late that night, a letter bound with a red ribbon arrived at the Duke's estate, a sign of an extremely urgent message. As the Duke packed his things, he kept thinking back to what Shadi had said. Prince Clay's lively, straightforward personality was one of his strengths. He'd always been good at expressing what he liked. You're heading off to Barnes this time, and there's no telling when you'll be back. Forget about expressing your feelings. At this rate, she might just drift away from you entirely. The next morning, Daisy came out to see the Duke off. Travel safely. I know it'll be a long time before Fialata and the second prince have any real connection, but I know you're still worried. Whatever happens, I'll find a way to force things back on track. Meanwhile, the Duke, remembering Shadi's advice about needing to actually show his feelings for her to understand, walked up to Daisy, bent down and pulled her into a sudden embrace, then pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Daisy's face turned crimson instantly. The Duke held her close and murmured against her ear, I'll be back soon. Daisy clutched at his coat, nodding against his chest, because I'm going to miss you so much. After the Duke left, Daisy stayed in a daze the rest of the day. At lunch, the words, because I'm going to miss you so much, kept looping endlessly through her mind, and they were still there at tea time. It wasn't until she caught sight of Fia's wildly tousled hair that she reached out to smooth it down. Fia smiled up at her. Daisy, you're doing that just like Papa does. At those words, Daisy's heart, which had only just started to settle, began pounding wildly all over again. No, she'd only just managed to calm down. Fia asked curiously, I wonder what Papa's doing right now. Just then, Shadi came rushing in. Daisy, there's a letter for you. Fia asked curiously whether it was from her father. Daisy took the letter and saw the seal. It was from the first prince. Does His Highness need something? After reading through it, Daisy said, His Highness says he'd like to visit. Since his official carriage will be passing nearby, he thought he might drop in along the way. Shadi grumbled. Of all times, why does he have to pick the exact moment the Duke's away? Ugh, what terrible timing. But we can hardly refuse to let the prince visit. He's coming while he's on official business, so he probably won't be able to stay long. That's right, he's got to be extremely busy, given he's dealing with state affairs. So, to avoid keeping His Highness from his duties, why don't we just offer him a quick cup of tea and leave it at that? What do you think? Daisy hesitated. Just tea, then. Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats rang out. That was fast. The first prince strode into the estate dressed in an elaborate formal outfit. Daisy quickly stepped forward, using the etiquette she'd learned. Greetings, Your Highness. Your visit is truly an honor for us. The first prince spoke with unusual formality. I hope my sudden visit hasn't caused you any trouble, Lady Daisy. No, not at all trouble, Your Highness. Why was his tone so different? Back at the palace, he never spoke this way. If I've startled the lady, I hope you'll be gracious enough to forgive me. You're overthinking this entirely, please don't say such things. Though she had no idea what was going on, all Daisy could do was play along as best she could. The first prince stared at her without saying another word, leaving her at a total loss for what to do next. Finally, the first prince couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out laughing. Do you really not mind at all? Weren't you two thinking to yourselves? Why is he acting like this all of a sudden? You must have been, right? Daisy felt a flicker of annoyance. Was he joking around with her? This prince was really something else. But before she could finish stewing over it, a loud thump came from inside the large trunk the first prince had brought with him. To everyone's shock, the second prince came climbing out of it. Phew, that was exhausting. The servants, startled to see the second prince crawling out of a trunk, broke into a panic. Oh my goodness, how could Edward possibly— The second prince, spotting his older brother right in front of him, lit up with joy and ran toward him with his little fists clenched. Daisy stared at the second prince, utterly stunned. No, absolutely not. This cannot happen, our chestnut. Meanwhile, upstairs, Fia was watching the second prince through her window, thoroughly unimpressed. Who is that guy?